Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. And because we have a lot of ground to cover, this is a Geo episode.
Oh
The
yeah.
two go hand in hand because who better to cover a lot of ground about a lot of different things? There's been a lot of different things this week, this past week and a half actually, and it's been long overdue because of some of the scheduling issues we had over the past couple months, as we've gone into detail about on previous episodes. We figured it was high time. So, of course, we do have a minutia minute, or if you prefer, an autism hour, which is what's been more recently to
It
cover.
used to be a minute.
It yes, it did used to be a minute, but we have plenty to cover on that front
Yeah,
as
I admit
well.
it.
And you know what? We're back. We're here. We're gonna be here probably for 3 hours, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So, without further ado, GSP,
Uh,
it's all yours to tell us what's
Okay.
happening on the front
Well,
lines.
first of all, Gio, thanks so much for coming along. We always
oh
love it
yeah.
when you can join us. Definitely adds a different kind of dimension to the report. Definitely gives it a much broader one, and we go into areas that we don't always discuss or have time to discuss.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so let's get on with it. Front the minutia minute or minutia hour. So you know what? We're going to start with Kursk, and the first photo is the first map I'm going to show you is an area that about 2 weeks ago everyone was suspecting would fall. Relatively speaking, we're that red line and south of it. So the reason for that was that the Ukrainians took out at least 3 out of 4 major bridges. And as you can see, the yellow line that goes across this area, just beneath the red line that I drew, that is the only defensive line that the Russians built in that area. Now, so there was this possibility that the Ukrainians could corner roughly 3,000 troops there, nearly an entire brigade. However, that's not happened, and there's been an interesting kind of dynamic that has formed there in Ukraine's efforts to get rid of the pontoon bridges, which replaced the civilian bridges that were destroyed in the first week or two. And that is so they began using their HIMARS and their M270s, which are the tracked version. Mostly Germany provides these vehicles for Ukraine. Now, we said basically back in August, there were several HIMAR units that were destroyed along with Patriot missiles. August 17th, August 23rd, another one on the 31st. And in this week, from roughly like September 3rd to September 6th, 7th, at least another 3 HIMARS were destroyed. So Ukraine now is very shy about using the HIMARS in this area, which has allowed the Russians to reinforce this pocket, just using their pontoon bridges. Now, of course, the Russians still have to contend with FPV drones, but one of the other instrumental factors in the Russians being able to hold this territory is in the town of Korenova. So Korenova is that little squiggle that you see in the large map, but now we can move to the next slide, and you get an idea of its location. So there was a point at which the Ukrainians controlled like maybe a third of this area, and then yesterday they or might have been today that the Russians pushed them out. Um, the Ukrainians have taken a lot of territory in Kursk. However, basically the front has been more or less the same for about 2 weeks, with some changes, with the Ukrainians taking some village, the Russians taking another. Most of the gains, I would say, are still on Ukraine's side, but they haven't been able to push very much further north. And again, that pocket is secured now. Um, I suppose you could go to the next slide just as a blow up to get a sense of the region of Korenovo. You can see it's a fairly decent sized town, and Matvievka is the village next to it, which the Russians largely control, but not all of it. The Ukrainians do have a foothold. The next slide is basically what the Kursk incursion looks like, but honestly, this slide is very hard. It's very hard to tell like what it is that the Ukrainians control because it's not easily outlined. If you want, I can draw one up right now, and I
Okay,
can to reveal the border.
Oh, can you throw the slides in the chat or no?
Okay,
yeah.
so roughly this is the roughly this is the border that the Ukrainians control, give or take. It's the best I could do with. It's at the bottom, Konstantin. It's the last slide way at the bottom, and I have an update for Toretsk that just came in. So that's it. It's a decent sized area, right? So Kursk is very interesting because the biggest gains that the Russians have had this war outside of the spring and summer of 2022 has been in August. So it's ironic that both the Ukrainians have had big gains, but not as much as in the late spring, early fall of 2022. 2023, they didn't really have any gains except for Rabotino, and we'll get to that. It was about the same what the Russians did. I think the Russians had like 150 square kilometers more, but the front did not move very much in 2023, with the exception of the strategic city of Bakhmut that the Russians took. So the Kupiansk thing brings into question again the whole problem with Ukrainian forces and the lack of men that they have at the front, because part of the reason that the Russians did not rush units from Donbass, except for one brigade, as far as I know, which was the 110th. Everything else that you're seeing there are basically their recruits, their conscripts, and Akhmat. So, and it was the recruits who held on to Suja for those first 3-4 days before the Ukrainians took it. So it wasn't like, they totally walked over all of them. And you have to understand, before the invasion, the Russians started demining this area because they themselves were planning to go in. And the generals had already told Putin, I'm repeating some of the things I said on the last show, but it does bear repeating. So the generals, I initially blamed the generals, but it turns out that 2 weeks before the attack, the generals had told Putin that there was a distinct possibility this would happen. Furthermore, Mercurius from the Duran has somebody on the inside who said in the last week of July that there was a profound possibility that Ukraine could make an incursion into Kursk. So I think it's interesting that Putin did not want to, let's say Russia nearly completely clears all the mines on the border with Sumy and makes a dash for the Sumy region, right? Of course, they would have been aware that the Ukrainian forces are gathering troops there. What makes him, is it because, he's visiting this or that country? What was it that made him not react? I don't know. But that was, I think, a decision that he made. I no longer think that it was the generals who were responsible. And you know what? Once we do the update, we can talk about what the Polish are doing right now in order to raise new brigades for Ukraine's 2025 counteroffensive. I kid you not.
It's
So
going to be
one
the
area that
year. That's what Project 2025 is actually about. That's what they don't tell you. It's a psyop. They're covering up
yeah
Ukraine. The Poles are going to take them straight to Moscow. 2025 is 1610.
yeah.
That's what these people seriously believe. Yeah, like you might think this is a joke, but
Oh,
you listen to some of these
I know.
people. This is they are convinced that is the only outcome to this war.
What did I say even before this war started? They will never stop believing in the superiority of the West, and there was never really a defeat. I said that before, you know, before Putler dropped the first missiles. So anyway, so we go on to Kupiansk, where what has been nothing less than short of a thorn in the side of Russia is the town of Sinkovka. So the Russians have finally captured it, and yet this is another example of the Ukrainians rushing troops from different regions of the front line in order to stop the attack on Pokrovsk. I also said the last two shows that Russia would stop going towards Pokrovsk and take care of the southern flank, where a pocket was forming on the southern flank of the Russian spearhead towards Pokrovsk and the town of Krasnogorovka, which is like a suburb basically of Donetsk, like a little town outside of Donetsk. It's not little. The Russians have been fighting there for months. Um, they did take it over, but you'll see when we get to those maps what I'm talking about. Um, so a minor gain, but when you consider the amount of troops that have been lost to try to take Sinkovka, and the Russians have had times where they've taken a part of Sinkovka and lost it. So, back in 2023, the Russians made some interesting gains around here that weren't expected. The Ukrainians began to panic, but they fortified this area very well. And there was that time that even Sirsky or Zaluzhny, this is when Zaluzhny was still head general of the Ukrainian military, not just the army, was almost taken out with a strike in Kupiansk. So we'll go to the next slide, and just to give you an idea of the village. So this village is basically just outside of Kupiansk. Um, I would say you're seeing another pocket forming, and the Russians are not. What they'll try to do is thicken this area, this spearhead. So I would expect them to start working on the forest to the northwest of them, and probably increase the size on the east side of the spearhead, right, on the east of Sinkovka, because too narrow a spearhead will mean that your soldiers essentially become entrapped in a pocket. So the south, just south of Kupiansk, we have another area that's been developing for the Russians in the Svatova area, but it's well west of Svatova now. It is, in a sense, it's closer to Kupiansk than it is to Svatova, but you can see this area is just south of Sinkovka and Kupiansk that I was talking about earlier. And what the Russians are probably going to try to do is reach the forested river area that you see, which is the Oskil River. The Oskil River, I believe, bifurcates Kupiansk. Not actually an easy spot for the Russians. I'll explain why. I don't know, Konstantin, if you put up the slide that I'm talking about. It's the one after Sinkovka. Hello?
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So, let's do the blow up. So I'll tell you why. So the Russians have captured this area of, I believe it's Pishanye. So Pishanye is a village. You can see the fortifications that the Russians took over from the Ukrainians, but Pishanye is on the low ground, and the Ukrainians in the last 72 hours made a small incursion into this area at Tabievka. And what could happen potentially if the Ukrainians had enough forces is they could cut off this huge salient. But So far, it hasn't happened. So for several days now, nothing has changed here. The Ukrainians have not made new attacks to try to cut off the salient. But that is something worth watching. The next area of the front that we're going to look at is Siversk, which is further south from here. We're moving basically from the north to the east, and then we'll go to the south. So up close here, last month the Russians took Rozdolivka, and this month they've almost taken Perozhny. They also took an area, Viemka, that you see in that off-white color. This area, in the larger context, if you put up the next slide, is where Siversk is. They are just south of Siversk now. And as you can see, Siversk has quite a rich trench system and barriers to stop it from a push going east to west. However, it doesn't really have it on the southern part. Now, Siversk, though, is kind of in a low ground area, but the area immediately west of it is a high ground. So when you see that arrow, it's going uphill, basically. So this is not like necessarily an easy area to take. The Russians will have if they make a push for Siversk, I predict it will be much later, not sooner. Probably because the Ukrainians control the forests in the north. You can see how well protected it is from the east. And the only push the Russians have is from the south, and that's just not enough of a variation of trajectories that the Russians can attack from. You need several trajectories, right, to keep the enemy off balance. But so that's Siversk. Now we can move to Chasiv Yar, where it's been quiet for a long time. But the Russians have made gains on the other side of the canal. You can see in the first slide that big red chunk that they took. That is Kalinina. Kalinina is a village north of Chasiv Yar. But they've also made significant, they've established themselves significantly in Chasiv Yar. Now, a week ago, they got pushed out in some of these areas, but they've regained them and added a small bit as well. And basically, if things keep going this way, if the Ukrainians do not move troops from from Kursk, then, more of central Chasiv Yar will be taken by the Russians. And one of the reasons I suspect that will be the case is if you go to the next slide, we have the area south of Kupiansk. This is west of Klishevka. This is a big chunk that the Russians took this week, and it is an area that they once controlled thanks to Wagner during the Russian besiegement of Bakhmut. So, Chasiv Yar is also on the way to Konstantinovka, and that's the really big complex that you see west of the area that I've highlighted, the urban agglomeration that you see there. That's Konstantinovka. It's about the same size of Bakhmut. It's close. So the next front is just south of the region that we're talking about. In fact, you would have seen some of those little gains just south of Chasiv Yar, and this is the area of Toretsk and Niu-York. So we'll do the blow up of it. The Russians have captured Pivnichny, which is sort of on the northern flank of the Russian push towards Toretsk. The Russians have taken areas of Toretsk proper, and I'll get into the to those areas just now. Konstantin, if we could move down to the last one, to the last two, not the one on Kursk, but the first map shows you the area that the Russians just captured this afternoon. And this is an industrial area, and I believe it's actually a prison that was captured the day before they captured Druzhba, which is north of Pivnichne. And so now they have the prison. This was a stronghold for the Ukrainians. You can also see that the earth mounds from their industrial processing plants, the mines that they have here are significant. They're very big, especially those two. Now the Russians have captured the sort of the two other big mines earlier. And I'm suspecting that the mound that you see south of the prison that the Russians just took will be another one, right? Chasiv Yar, from the point where the Russians are, everything going down is on lower ground. This is why I suspect the Ukrainians would probably be doing everything possible to keep the areas around the mounds secure in the future. So now, so that was Toretsk, but let's take a look at New York. So if you go to the first slide, it gives you an idea of basically the area around New York and Toretsk, the area that the Russians captured, I believe, yesterday. And then we can look at the blow up. This was an interesting area because the Ukrainian channel Deep State always said that the northern tip of New York, which has a big industrial zone, all these towns do, which are like little fortresses, had never actually fallen. And there's been kind of like, people weren't sure that the Russians surrounded. Was there this gulf that allowed them to go through a gray zone? In any case, the Ukrainians made a counterattack. It might have been the 47th. I think the 47th was transferred to Kursk. It's been brought back. I'm not, it's a battalion that has like a lot of experiences, had a lot of losses. They were originally stationed in Rabotino, but they're motivated, even though they've always had like large losses. And sometimes they've been very successful against the Russians in their counterattacks. But basically, as of late yesterday, early today, the Russians have, you can see in the red outline, the area that the Russians have taken. So are there still guys in the industrial zone? Probably. I don't know for sure. The purple outline that you see is an area that the Ukrainians took about 2 days ago. The next slide is just Druzhba. Honestly, it's not that important. We can skip it. It's part of the Toretsk agglomeration that the Russians took the last few days. Then we move to Pokrovsk. So here's an overview of Pokrovsk, and those pale white outlines, that sort of pale blue-gray color, those are the territories that the Russians have secured in the last few days. And basically, this kind of shows what I was talking about, that there was this enormous pocket south of the Pokrovsk spearhead that the Russians were building, ever since, well, the whole year, but particularly after they took Ochertine. And this area now is mostly in the gray zone. So you can see how this area, even Bloomberg did an article, or it might have been Forbes, but one of them did an article last week where they talked about a significant number of troops getting trapped there. History Legends did a video on this, and troops were like, some of the troops like the 47th mechanized that went in to get these guys out of there were attrition heavily, according to his video. So if we move to the next slide, this is Krasnogorovka that I was talking about earlier. So you can see now the push from the south to close this big gap. This will make it much harder for the Ukrainians to try to sever that salient that is developing towards Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk, what I've read, is a city of like 50 to 55,000 people before the war, and it was over 100,000 during Soviet times. So this is not a small place. I would liken it similar to Bakhmut in terms of like population density. I don't know if its footprint is just as big. It's definitely on higher ground, unlike Bakhmut, which was all lower ground, and which made defending it for the Ukrainians from Chasiv Yar much easier. If we move to the next slide, we're going to see the story of a successful Ukrainian counterattack and a Russian evacuation in the town of Selidova. So Selidova is another big town. The Russians had a very successful day when they took that chunk that we saw on the overall map, and within a day or two, they captured the two big earthwork mounds that were next to this to the town, and they occupied roughly 30% of the town. But there was a counterattack, and as far as I know, from either Weeb Union or Weeb Union, not History Legend. He hasn't done an update on this particular area. The order was given for them to withdraw from this area, that they didn't have enough manpower. And so that's where it's been for the last 2 days. And in the south is the village of Ukrainsk. We can go to, that's an area where the Russians are also going to want to consolidate their power. If you go to the last slide for the Pokrovsk front, you're going to see where the Russians have started making re-incursions back into Selidova, outside of the Terrakon, the earth mound. And now we move to Vuhledar. Now, Vuhledar is also going to be, like, if you think of the Russians focusing in on taking Donetsk, right? Because Lugansk is like something like 95% under Russian control. Not so much Donetsk. I think it's like 65 or 70%. But what would give them almost an ability to really do a big aero maneuver, if they're going to do that, which I don't think they will, because like for countries to do big aero maneuvers, like either they have to be fighting a much weaker enemy, or if the enemy is peer, then you can't do it, because, well, you would have to, make something like between 25 to 50% of your national economy a war economy, and the Russians aren't there yet. They're like 6.5%.
Surveillance technology, satellites, drones.
Yes. I'm so glad you said
that. Staging something like that is almost impossible in the modern era.
Yes. Yeah, and you know what? Speaking of staging, we should we'll get to Poltava. We'll get to Poltava and what exactly happened in Poltava. So there is Vuhledar on the main map that I've highlighted, and you can see the gains that the Russians have been making. But notice the gains in the center of the map, that big chunk, and then the little red chunk next to it. What was the name of this town? I think it started with a P. Peshanya? I forget how it was pronounced. Anyhow, so the Russians have been, they are going to want to take Vuhledar, but this is the preparation for Vuhledar. They've cut off the highway from the north that links it with Konstantinovka. And I believe the Russians have already captured Konstantinovka. So this is the other Konstantinovka, not the one around Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut. Different Konstantinovka. This is little Konstantinovka. So if you go to the third map from under the title of Vuhledar, you can see what the Russians will try to be doing, right? They're going to want to press from the northeast and from the south going eastward. They want to put Vuhledar in a pocket. Now, they've taken one of the highways that led to Vuhledar. That's why they took that big chunk. That's why it was necessary. And once that happens, especially when autumn comes, taking Vuhledar should be easier. Now, okay, this is another thorn in Russia's side. Vuhledar and Synkivka, definitely. There was the failed attack in February 2023. And I believe the commander of that, who I think was Chechen background, was eventually fired. But going to the third slide, we're going to see how the highway that goes northwards was cut off by the Russians. It's been cut off for over 10 days now. And you can see that the Russians have taken another farm field closer to it, right? Not creating any pockets of Ukrainian resistance. So that's the third slide. The fourth slide, the last slide, Konstantin, of Vuhledar shows you the earth mound just north of Vuhledar town proper. And the Russians have a foothold here. And taking this area, of course, is not going to be easy, but it is an area that the Russians are very much interested in because it's going to be pivotal. One of those roads that could lead to Vuhledar for resupply goes just west of this mound, of this terracon. So that's Vuhledar. And then lastly, we have Rabotino. So all the gains almost all the gains that the Ukrainians made last year in Rabotino have been neutralized. Those two lines that you see, that's, the bottom line is where it is now. The line above it is where it was before the Ukrainians launched their counteroffensive. But recall that, there was like this big pot-shaped salient that went all the way down, close to the second line of defense. And we're almost done. So we go to Kherson. This was a total just across from Kherson city, just southwest of it. The Russians made a small incursion first, and then that bloomed into a much larger area that was taken, again, because the Ukrainians are moving troops out of this area. But this is an area that the Ukrainians can afford to give up because, one, the Russians are not going to make a daring assault on Kherson after they withdrew from it. Ukraine would have to be in a much, much weaker position than it is for them to do that. So it was, it was an intelligent retreat. And you can see the next slide of where this fits in contextually. So the Russians have retaken that island. You can see the day before where that is taking place and how Kherson, the city, is to the northwest of it. And then that's it for the updates. I guess if you guys want, we can talk a little bit of the overall strategy, what's going on with Poland wanting to recruit. They're working on a brigade that they promise will be 4,500 men, and that they will send there. Now they did have another brigade, but this was a brigade that was not put into action. They started it either, I think, 2014 or 2016, and it's a brigade made of Poles, Ukrainians, and Lithuanians. But wouldn't you know it, the day that the SMO started, they pulled back this brigade. Now, the place where the Poles are going to train these men will be in Lublin, which is right next to the border of Ukraine. It's very close. I don't think it's more than 50 kilometers. So that's advantageous. I understand the logic of it, but I think there's some underlying problems, right? I'm going to just read you some, basic stats about how many people the EU thinks have left, or let's say fighting age men between 18 to 64. So they estimate about 812,000 men have left for the EU. of Ukrainian descent that are eligible to fight for Ukraine. Okay, that doesn't include those two that went to Russia. If you account for the entire world, they estimate it's over 1 million. Again, according to Ukrainian standards of fighting age men, right? Some figures have it between like 1.5 to 2 million, but whatever. So, yeah, Kiev, the CBC Radio Canada had a report that said Kiev estimates that there are 300,000 Ukrainians of military age currently in neighboring Poland. So that is nearly the size of the Ukrainian force right now. That's about 65-70% of the size of the Ukrainian force.
And just to
fighting on the front.
I did put a general map of where the Polish and
good.
Ukrainian borders meet, and you can see Warsaw up there. You can see Lvov down towards the center of it, Ternopil, Rovno, Lutsk, and then Lublin is. I just had it, but it is on the map. Don't worry. But it's
on the Polish side, north of Lvov.
Yes, it's actually, you can see the direct highway connecting it to Warsaw. It's a bit smaller on this map. I use the Yandex map instead of Google Maps because just I trust them more when it comes to this because Google Maps has a lot of flaws. Let's just put it that way. Which I'm not going to spurg out about cartography and maps right now. I'll leave that for a different discussion.
Yeah, different shows. My biggest doubt is these guys have been in Poland anywhere from like 2 to 2.5 years, right? Like, what's the incentive for them to go back?
And they also do low-wage work in Poland. And the Polish government can go on about this all they want, but they are cheap migrant labor, and I doubt that they want to part with that.
Right. There might be, like, obviously this pressure from the U.S. Remember that Yermak visited America like a few weeks ago, or might have been the end of July, beginning of August. And, there was talk that, although Ukraine reduced the conscription age from 27 to 25, really what they should do is reduce it again down to 21. Right?
I'll also add on that point, given the amount of abuses we've seen from the Ukrainian conscription agency, the TCC, I have a hard time believing that they aren't conscripting men who are underage. You can't convince me that they're not black banning these guys who are 21, 22, maybe even younger in some cases.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I don't know what the incentive is, right? This is not the first time we've heard something like this. I guess all they're telling us is, hey guys, you know how we said we were going to send back all those Ukrainians from Poland to go fight? Well, we're not going to force them to do that. But because guess what? They're volunteering. They already several thousands have volunteered. That's not unlikely because the number one complaint they believe, that is these future conscripts who ran away from the war, is that they don't have confidence that they will be properly trained if they go to Ukraine. And according to a CNN interview between Christiana Amanpour and General Siversk, that is true. They do get 6 weeks of training. He said, we aim to train them for 2 to 3 months, blah, blah, blah. But when she asked, like, don't you have a lot of conscripts that, are trained for a much shorter period of time, he had to acknowledge that was the case. So, I mean, okay.
That's enough time to just train him to point and shoot, pretty much, in military terms. Yeah. But, what
do you guys think? I've hogged this conversation long enough.
I was going to ask about, I was going to ask about the maps, though. Like, okay, so that big fissure in after the Botana, if they that sliver of land that you highlighted, what's more eastward, not eastward, what's more to up not upward, downwards, I guess, if consider Russia more northern. What's going to happen when they take? I mean, I'm assuming that past Rybotina in certain areas that there's going to be intense urban combat. Maybe not to the scale of what Bakhmut was, but I can't get that out of my head. McCoy saying it. Bakhmut. What do you think is the Russian plan or the Kremlin plan to when they actually hit the Dnieper River? Like, will they just stop, or will they be forced to contend with territory beyond the Dnieper? Like, or would that pretty much be done in terms of the Donetsk campaign?
It's a good question. I think implicit in that question is asking, how many troops would you need to do that?
Right.
But I think that's really like, if you're looking at an overall victory for Russia, then that would be like step 3. Step 1 will be to take Pokrovsk. But in order to take Pokrovsk, that pocket between Krasnogorovka and Selidove will have to be taken first. Now, as you can see, they're working on that, right? Pokrovsk is not a small village. It's bigger than Avdiivka. So it's on a high ground, unlike Bakhmut. Now half the population has left. So estimates are like 26, maybe 27,000 people are still there, if they're still there. I've seen conflicting videos about that. So the thing about Pokrovsk is it has no less than 6 different highways radiating in every direction, linking it to Dnepropetrovsk, up to Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, like all over the place, right? They go literally in every direction. And taking Pokrovsk will be huge. When it will look like that the Russians will be ready to do that by taking care of their flanks, that is, I think, when you're going to see the Ukrainians begin to withdraw from Kursk.
But I do think you're overlooking a large detail here. Pokrovsk has a secret weapon up its sleeve.
Oh, really?
And this is what's going to stop the Russian army in its tracks.
Yeah.
The city workers of Pokrovsk have planted some flowers, okay?
Yeah.
Those are more fearsome than dragon's teeth, to what I understand. Better than a trench network. The flowers, they're just going to repel them because we all know the Russians are orcs and they can't tolerate anything good or beautiful. So it is the invincible.
They won't know what to
defense
do with the
strategy.
Flowers.
They'll just disintegrate upon coming into contact with them. And this is what I was told how the Ukraine war is going to play out. And I'm glad that Zelensky and the city of Pokrovsk and the mayor and the city council and the city workers managed to come up with this impenetrable defense. If only they had the secret back when the war started in February 2022, Hitler would be out of power now. Russia would be balkanized into 10 different countries, all by flower power.
All they would have had to have done was like just send bouquets of flowers to the Kremlin every day, and all of this would have been averted.
So true. That's what they missed.
No, but above that area from Rybotina, there's a big city. I don't know how big it is. Orekiv. Do you think they could potentially go all the way up there? Like that would be a huge battlefield in terms of urban warfare.
Here's why I don't think they're going to do that. Okay. Logistically, yes. So the Russians have one railroad line south of the Robotyno-Vremevsky Ledge.
Yeah.
Front line of the southern front, right? The problem is logistically, everything would have to come first from Crimea and go along eastward, or from Rostov go westward. It's an area that has more defensive capabilities rather than offensive capabilities. Right? Like when you look at Ukraine, which is in the north of this region, they have Zaporozhye city, they have Dnepropetrovsk, they have Kharkov, and they also have Poltava, right? Major centers, industrial centers, and they can just keep pouring that stuff down, right?
Yeah.
That area of Zaporozhye and southern Donetsk, doesn't have that. All of that is much further away. And it's a narrow strip, which means like being attacked is much easier. So it's kind of like the reason that the Russians had to leave Kherson, right? They were on the other side of the Dnieper, and resupplying the group there just became too difficult, particularly when the Ukrainians started receiving HIMARS. So I know when you look at the map, you think logistically, well, this is a huge pocket that's just ripe for the taking. But the truth is that the Ukrainians, with all the amount of conscripts, like, for instance, it was just published today by the New York Times that there are 19,000 court cases against Ukrainian soldiers who have abandoned their positions just in 2024, right? And this goes back to what we were saying about the conscripts, right? Yes, a lot of these guys are dragged off the street, right? But they're not all like that. And so the morale is kind of mixed. Like, I think the incursion into Kursk helped the morale with some troops, but not with others, particularly those who've been fighting on the Eastern Front in Donbass for such a long time. The Russians have to break through the highly dense, rich area of Donetsk, because you could say there's nothing between Donetsk and the Dnieper, right? But it has two major cities that are bigger than a lot of the other cities in Donetsk. They're not as big as Donetsk city, which is 1.1 million. It's the same size as Kharkov, right? But they're bigger than any other town in Donetsk, right? So it wouldn't be a Zaporozhye city and Dnieper city, or Dnepropetrovsk as the Russians call it.
Dnepropetrovsk, yeah. But that has been like a huge thorn on the side of the Donetsk People's Republic, though, like in terms of logistics and everything. So
yeah, that's why they have to take care of Pokrovsk first, because that's their frontline logistical hub.
Yeah, exactly. But that would require Russia to commit.
Well, they're close. They're 8.5 kilometers from Pokrovsk right now. Right?
They would have to throw, another 100,000 men into there in order to take those two large cities, or maybe more. So
I think what the Russians are hoping for is that there is a decisive battle for Pokrovsk in a way that there was for Bakhmut, but even more so. And that after Pokrovsk falls, then the kind of disarray happens.
Yes,
right?
And I was just about to mention that the other big part of this is the chaos in the Kiev government, and we saw this with the Minister of Resignations. We'll get into that in a little bit here. But a large part of the Russian strategy in this war at this point is going to be sowing instability within the Ukrainian state infrastructure. And we've seen this before. We saw this with the strikes that happened last Monday, on several key targets across the entire country of Ukraine. And that...
including Poltava.
Yes, Poltava, and we'll get to that with the... of course, it had to be a Swedish instructor that got killed in Poltava.
Yes.
Of any country, any ethnicity, it had to be a Swede, of course. But what the Russians are ultimately banking on, especially with Zelensky's term having been expired, and that is the justification they've been using for a lot of their escalation, that there's no longer a quote-unquote legitimate government in Ukraine, is that they want to push for this. They want to push for what ultimately seems like a capitulation. And by scoring these small victories in success, especially if Pokrovsk is as decisive as one might hope, then that is going to lead to even more of a loss in confidence in Kiev. And more of a breakdown in morale. And just in terms of logistics and supplying the front, it's also going to be out the window.
It's just going to be much harder. Like, if you take Pokrovsk, right, it's going to be much harder for the Ukrainians to supply places like Vuhledar or Kramatorsk or Konstantinovka, right? Like all those places, Chasiv Yar is another one. Even Toretsk will be slightly more difficult, right? And of course, it will allow the Russians to gain a hub. Then Pokrovsk becomes like their logistical hub, kind of like Bakhmut was a staging ground for the Russians that had safe cover close to Chasiv Yar in order to make, incursions into Chasiv Yar and the surrounding region. And that's what I think the Russians are counting on.
And one of the other big
thing to
developments I wanted
watch,
to mention. Go ahead first.
the thing to watch is as the Russians will begin, I believe at the end of September is when we're going to see the Russians try for Pokrovsk. And that, as I said, that'll be because the southern flank of that push, that is where they're going to focus on for the next few weeks to clear that up. And when that push starts to come in the next few weeks after, like I say, late September, maybe the first week of October, then the thing to watch out for will the Ukrainians be making trench systems outside of Pokrovsk? Right? Like, will they do that? Will they anticipate that? Or will it be like Avdiivka, where they did some haphazard trenches here and there? They took all their forces from the Zaporozhye front in order to to work as counterstrike groups. Like, that's what we should be looking out for at the beginning of October, the end of September.
Yes, I would certainly co-sign pretty much everything you just said there. And one other thing I wanted to bring up, and this does tie somewhat back into the idea of the Ukrainian Legion coming back out of Poland, which I have a few things to say about that, is also the increased posturing in Belarus. And not only with Russian troops, but with actual Belarusian troops. And that it's created some paranoia within Ukraine where, since the beginning of the war, they've had this border enforced, and they've always had a contingent of troops. Since the Russians withdrew from Kiev, since we had the false peace in 2022, in March, April, May 2022, is that you have had this border secured, you have had this border guarded, and more or less nothing gets across. And you've seen in recent weeks, Lukashenko has been saber-rattling, he's been posturing, and the Belarusians, in fact, moved their own vehicles, have moved their own military equipment, with a B symbol, by the way. Unlike the Z, unlike the V. That's another one.
Biggers.
Very true, very true.
Semper Biggers,
that's
me
what
and
it
Stowe
stands for.
covered that artist, yeah.
But yeah, yes, now that you mentioned that, all the same posturing that you saw in the lead up to the special military operation, if you will. And one of the speculations going all the way back when Macron was doing his own saber rattling, is that this NATO coalition, this coalition of the willing he was trying to gather, it was speculated that they would take over guard duties for that border to free up Ukrainian troops to fight on the front line. And going back to this Ukrainian Legion, you had a lot of these men saying, we didn't want to fight because we were worried about improper training, we didn't want to be thrown into the meat grinder, etc., etc., etc. What I think, we've talked about this before, the main goal of this is it's a so-called Ukrainian Legion. Who do you think are actually going to make up the men who are volunteering?
Yeah.
They're going to be Poles, they're going to be Lithuanians, they're going to be maybe even some Western Europeans, think German, French, even as far as the Anglosphere Americans. These are going to be people who are quote-unquote
Australians,
Ukrainians.
Canadians,
yes.
especially, yeah.
All of the usual suspects, all the mercenary ethnicities that we've seen throughout this war are going to gather.
And there were a lot also during the Kursk incursion.
Yes.
Lots of videos of dead Western mercenaries, or the voice of people speaking French and English, caught in radio communications, etc., etc.
I think a few Canadians actually got killed as well.
Yeah.
So
no, but I mean, but when it comes to, well, what happened recently? Was it a Ukrainian minister that threatened Lukashenko that they were going to go for Belarus as well, or something like that?
Yeah. It's just talk.
No, but okay, but I wanted to talk a bit about the map of like actually taking Pokrovsk, because there's a number of other key areas there. Like, how do you pronounce it? Prodivka, and so forth, like before you get to Pokrovsk. But okay, so say that it's true that you have, what was the number of fighting age men in Poland? About 300,000.
Yep.
I mean, that's basically recuperation of the Ukrainian military currently. that's actively fighting. So, but then again, why did they flee to begin with? I mean, that's so.
Yes,
there will be a sizable contingent, I think, that will buy into Ukrainian patriotism enough to actually cross the border back into Ukraine to get conscripted. But could you potentially press gang 300,000 men in another country, technically another country, that would be able to fight on the battlefield? And what would Russians' response be? Would Russia basically be forced into switching to a wartime economy, commit close to another 200 to 300,000 men to achieve the troop parity that they have now? Would that be in some ways a disaster scenario for the Russians if you were to somehow magically rapture all of these men to the battlefield?
Perhaps 2 years ago. But I think at this point, it's a foregone conclusion. If they would have done this sooner, it may have gotten that desired effect.
Yeah.
Not necessarily pushing back the Russians, not necessarily seeing maybe any battlefield victories, but like you said, driving the Russians into wartime economy, making the war more of an everyday issue for people in Russia, making it something that is much more of a burden on them. And like I said, while I think that might have been possible at some point, particularly before the 2023 counteroffensive, it's too little too late.
But that's what I mean, like even the talks recently of, not that they would have to give them any green light, because there's been many cases where, but like, I mean, in terms of geopolitics, to give the Ukrainians green light into bombing areas deep within Russia, particularly Moscow, I don't think that it would totally have this, like, what they want, why they want to do that, because they think that it will have a demoralizing effect on the Russian population, that they would basically force Putin's hand and they would force the Kremlin's hand into giving negotiations and ceding territory. But I don't really think that would happen if you start seeing thousands of or hundreds or thousands even of Russian civilians spewing out, like, splayed out in the middle of Moscow streets. I mean, if anything, that would, I don't know. I mean, it's banking on the Russian population being as decadent as any Western population would be if we were bombed. And I'm not talking about, like, for example, America circa 2001 after 9/11. I'm talking about, like, current Western European and North American, Canadian American populations, that level of, like, oh fuck, this is really real. I don't think that the Russian if anything, it probably could galvanize them into going to a full-blown war, the way that you'd think of a traditional war as. But,
well, there's elections happening in Kursk region right now, right? So, and first of all, I mean, Russia has a history of allowing enemies, Russia has a whole history in their battlefield tactics to give up space for time. And this is not like some major incursion. Yes, there are dangers. Yes, it was embarrassing, but it's not to those degrees that the West imagines them to be. In fact, it's even increased volunteers, right? Like, think of there were all kinds of pros and cons for Putin and Russia not preparing the country for a war with Ukraine in 2021. And stalling on it in 2022. But if you had to choose a safe method, not an uncostly method, but a safe method politically, where you could get volunteers without calling the SMO obsolete, and now we are in a state of war, we're going to go to a war economy, we're going to draft every man, blah, blah, blah. Much like the way Ukraine is doing it. It has been skillfully achieved to use every single lemon that Russia gets for them to turn it into lemonade, so to speak. No one's denying that there's costs to that, but they have turned it into a positive. And so now he doesn't have to call for another for another recruitment, for another partial mobilization, because he has the troops. So that won't be expected anymore, right? And that's something that Ukraine can't do. Ukraine has been in a permanent state of martial law since the war began, since in the first week of the start of the war. So, and I sent Konstantin a map. You can see where Pokrovsk is in that giant salient that the Russians are forming, and the southern area, the pinchers that want to close that area off before they move further, right? So yeah, I that I think is a strategy they've chosen. Like we talk about Poland, potentially 300,000. Well, 100,000 men between the ages of 18 to 60 they're not going to all join, right? You might get 2 or 3%, right? And that's substantial. Like you can get a brigade or two out of that, right? That's all right. Like I guess it's commendable, but it's not a game changer. And if there aren't any more successes, like you're not going to convince that population to go join the war. There's guys that have never left Ukraine since this war started, and they're not the same guys, no matter how much their rhetoric might be identical, than the guys who did leave Ukraine, right? Like not all of them have a podcast and a map update YouTube channel every day and about how they're kicking the orcs and all of this nonsense, right?
Not all of them have spinny wheel tattoos. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
No, but yeah, I mean, but a valid criticism, to play devil's advocate, would be that it is. People thought that the Kursk offensive would be immediately repelled because it's Russian territory and where Putin has sort of like sat in his hands a little bit. And so how come they haven't immediately repelled them out of Kursk? And I mean, I'm sure they've evacuated the population, have they not?
So as far as I understand, like a lot of bad things did happen. Yeah. So last week, another pregnant woman was killed. So Ukrainians are attacking civilians. There are 2,000 civilians whose destinies we don't know about. 102 Russian soldiers were captured. Now, about the same amount of Ukrainian soldiers have been captured, right? Part of the reason, like, why aren't the Russians doing that? I don't know. Maybe they can't do that. Maybe they think it's better to stabilize the front lines in that direction, because remember, there were no trench networks that were built there, so it's all rapid maneuver warfare. All the early advances that the Ukrainians they did with infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers. They didn't do it like tanks played a very minor role in this. They only came in, like the tanks and heavy artillery stuff only came in later. Not that they never used it. People just understand proportions, right? And that there was that one salient that they formed going towards like the Kursk nuclear power plant. They sent 10 to 12 infantry fighting vehicles, American, not Bradleys, the other ones, the Max Pros, right? All of them taken out. Each of them carried like 8 to 9 guys, and all of them liquidated, right?
Yeah, like, by the Russian Air Force.
Yeah. So the other thing to consider is, I said maybe they can't, right? And I think that applies for both sides here. Suppose you do raise an army of 300,000 in Poland.
Yeah.
Do you have the military materiel to supply them? Not just an AK-47 or a German spec gun.
No, you need combined arms. You need a way to defend them with artillery.
Yeah. Like it's no good if you just send them in with a vest and a helmet and a
Kalashnikov
and a Kalashnikov, right? Like
made in
that.
Korea.
Like that's not enough, right? Like
the only time them to die basically against a
right.
Yeah, at least throw in a few T-72s.
Yes, yeah. So I would say the Russians too don't want to. If they can avoid it, they don't want to go to a fully wartime economy, They were very hesitant, and they're still hesitant. Now they've doubled the amount of spending, but it's still just under 7%. That to me tells me that, that maybe there's factors I don't know about, but they would rather go at this pace than any other pace, right? Maybe politically it wouldn't be advantageous for them to go to a wartime economy. Maybe that will happen later. I don't know. That will depend on if NATO gets involved, right? NATO itself cannot, just take a look at all these stupid arguments about let us strike within Russia, right? Let us strike within Russia is the new what is the new wonder weapon in absence of a wonder weapon, right?
What reason they're asked the HIMARS, it was the javelins. Remember the javelin thing?
Yeah, the javelins.
Saint Javelin, yeah.
Yeah, so the America cannot spare thousands of javelins to Ukraine, maybe 100, but that is what is underneath the wings of their F-16s, their F-22s, their F-35s, right? Their F-15s, if they still use them here and there, right? They're not going to give over their entire stockpile to Ukraine.
You know what happened to it? You know where a lot of javelins are right now? A lot of them are rotting away in the Iraqi deserts after operations. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean,
because an FPV drone is even cheaper and just as effective.
Yeah, that's what I mean. America, they don't have. Again, it's not 2002 anymore. It's not 2003. It's not even 2023. I mean, sorry, it's not even 2013. The American military-industrial complex is quite different from the George W. Bush era.
And
it's quite different.
There's no way.
It's quite different than the Lyndon Johnson era as well, which people still think it is. But
there's that, and the Ukrainians are fighting a much tougher force than Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
Right.
They're not fighting.
They're not even comparable.
Reverse on a Soviet tank. It's not.
Yeah. It's not even comparable. So the question is how do you supply all these guys, right? And both sides have to look at what their industrial capacity is, and I think you're seeing the Russians are steadily increasing. Both sides are steadily increasing, but the Russians are still way ahead. And America is not going to weaken itself for the sake of Ukraine. I don't think so. Unless some hothead gets in and says we're going to war with Russia.
And I doubt it. And America has other obligations elsewhere, especially in the Middle East.
Yes.
Imagine if
and China.
Yeah, and say and China, but the Taiwan thing I'm more skeptical of, to be honest with you. But in terms of the Middle East, though, I mean, you never know what's going to happen because, say, there is major disruptions with Israel and so forth, and with Iran, then. Or even in the northern Helm in Africa, say you do have fucking coconuts and waltz getting in, then and there's a bunch of military obligations in North Africa and in the Middle East, then it was sort of like when October 7th happened. Even ardent Ukrainian supporters said, "Well, I guess the attention's off of us." So you never know what black swan event's going to happen. But say by 2025 the war is still going on, they could marshal a significant number of troops, but to be significant to turn the war around, the Ukrainian population in general just isn't, or even the military forces in various NATO countries that are sneakily involved in it. It's not enough. I don't see them doing this Nofvoid fantasy of repelling all Russian troops out of Crimea, out of Donbass, going right up to the Russian border and restoring not even the 1991 borders. What is it the 1991 borders.
I mean, Ukraine lost Crimea almost 11 years ago.
Yeah.
In an instant as well. That wasn't a hard-fought campaign. There were Russian troops, there was a sympathetic population, and they had a bloodless coup and Crimea fell within a matter of days. But I did want to return back to the point about the military-industrial complex, America's obligations, and supplying a war effort, because
Yeah, go ahead.
one of the big things you have to consider that a lot of people have overlooked is because of the past 30, 40 years, America's supply chain is so entangled, not only in China, but in East Asia in general, which would be one of the most contentious regions in the world if a major conflict were to break out, where many of the vital components for military manufacturing are shipped in either from China, from Japan, from India, from Taiwan. And, I mean, especially China, which would be most definitely at odds with the U.S. If we announce some program that we are remilitarizing in order to support the Ukrainian war effort and support some sort of harebrained NATO coalition, the Chinese would very easily be able to cut off those supply chains, impose sanctions like how we've imposed sanctions on many other countries, where we're completely tied into that. And I mean, you don't. That's even getting beyond the whole microchip thing. Of course, the issues with Taiwan and the idea that might be moving to South Korea. Putting all that aside for now, just when it comes to not only vital military but vital industrial components, those are so tied up not only in China but in the Asia Pacific in general. The Americans, at this point, it would take a massive effort in order to restore a native military industry, and that's also finding the kind of people who would be willing to work in heavy industry. And these days, especially with the way things have gone, what they can bring in more migrant workers. Do you want the same people who, I'm not putting down people who, pick apples for a living. I mean, it's honest work, but let's be honest, most of them are low-skilled migrant laborers. There's not the people who are qualified to work in heavy industry. And as far as the American citizenry itself, I don't think there's many of those people who exist these days. Maybe steel workers, and they're quite literally a dying breed.
What about Haitians?
Oh,
Yeah.
of course. They can bring mud cookies to the plant, and it would. You got me.
You guys dealing with them?
Yeah. 20,000.
Stop killing your neighbor's cats.
Geese are a pest, though. I gotta admit, that is true.
I disagree, but I'll
they're just like good old American hunters, like true. This is what Hicklibs are saying, that they're just like true, real-blooded Americans hunting.
They're tapping into the indigenous traditions of living off the land and using the parts of every animal, of course.
Yeah, like that fucking guy in Texas. He's like a fake Texaner on Twitter. He's like, yeah, they're just like real-blooded Americans, and there's not that apartment complex that got taken over by illegals in the Texas-Mexico border.
And
it's
the one
like
in Colorado. Oh, that
and the Colorado
exist.
one, yeah, it doesn't exist. But if it does, it's like they're just real-blooded Americans, like you or anybody.
They're just
that are trying to like make a living.
Right, but we need to take your guns. It's
They're hunting. Like
I went duck hunting last weekend with my son, my son's boyfriend, and my son's boyfriend's husband. It was great.
Like that trans shooter, he went hunting with his old man. Oh, no. Like that. Did you see that video? yeah. Real red-blooded American. Oh boy.
But Constantine, we especially me, I cut you off.
Yeah, go ahead.
But no, you guys are touching on something. These are the people who will work in American heavy industry to get us those artillery shells for Ukraine. We've cracked the case.
Yeah, I mean, we were saying, Gio, on this show, like even last year, like, because there was talk about the spring summer offensive of Ukraine, and it wasn't going that well, and in the news was constantly, how do we increase production? We're going to make this many extra missiles and bombs and 155 millimeter shells, and Constantine and I were basically saying, if they don't do it, like if they don't get their act together in 2024. If they don't move that needle in 2024, because roughly there's both sides have this roughly around the same amount of men, right? So if the West doesn't do it, how serious is the West? Like, unless they are doing it and they're storing this stuff, and they're going to roll into Russia, which I kind of doubt. But again, there are crazies. And it could be like a move that they will do that's only temporary for political expediency purposes, but that's not serious. And you have the articles from July about how, the million shells that Czechoslovakia promised has fallen through. They're not going to. They can't. So it's not there, right? They haven't upped their game in a way to give Ukraine a victory, right?
In European and Israel, let's not even get into that. That's just completely
That's
tanked.
probably because they don't, they want a lot more dead Ukrainians before Ukraine wins.
Oh, of course.
If Ukraine wins.
No, but why haven't they ramped up production? Theoretically, I mean, unless there really is sort of like a huge IQ shredder when it comes to actually managing an industrial base.
I think it's partly economy. I think if they went on a bigger war footing, the kind of inflation that you see all across Western Europe and America would just become higher.
Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. Like,
and they're afraid of the political ramifications.
Yeah, no, but you mean Russia or the West?
The West.
Oh yeah, because Russia. I mean, I've seen some people, friends of mine, they say like, well, after the war, Russia's kind of fucked because they're subservient to China, and they sort of like there's a lot of like brain drain of like younger libtarded Russians that I don't know. I guess they can work in tech or whatever. That people are leaving, and that they're still like looting the economy, blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, I mean, obviously every power suffers after a war temporarily, but I mean, it's not good that Russia's being driven towards China. But at the same time, I mean,
it is what it is. I mean,
they're a pariah state now, and
the balance between Russia and China is overstated. I mean, look at who imports oil and gas from who, just for starters.
Oh, true.
And in terms of like military research and development, I don't want to say the Chinese are incompetent. Far from. They are a force in and of themselves. But once again, that's coming out of Russia. And in terms of just political leadership, I would say, I would, and a lot of people will probably disagree and very profusely, I would still make the argument that to this day, in the Russia-China relationship, Russia is still the senior partner between the two in most aspects. Pretty much anything but economy, really.
Yeah, in strategy, like in geostrategic planning and thinking, there's only one safe way China can get energy, and that's through Russia. Yeah. Every other method, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all these other countries,
or their neighbors that hate them.
All of these countries can be compromised. Like if things really start going to shit, right? There's at the end of the day, there is only one safe way that China can get the energy supply that it needs, and it can't be a formidable state without it. But there have been, some interesting news, about China and Taiwan. There was a Chinese analyst that was saying that, okay, this sounds really crazy, and it doesn't reflect on me because I don't know what to think about it. But there was a Chinese analyst who was not in China, outside of China, naturally living in the West, and he's not necessarily pro-China and wasn't in his early days, definitely. But he was saying that he thinks Xi Jinping is going to go for Taiwan at the end of the year, this year.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's getting older, he's 71, blah, blah, blah. Take it with a grain of salt. However, the Chinese have this year done drills where they blockade Taiwan. And in fact, they did like 33 battles and invasion scenarios, and they took their best leader to lead Taiwan. And he won 32 out of 33 scenarios. So that tells you Taiwan is going to be like a very difficult place to crack.
Yeah.
But there are other clues, like America trying to bring back computer chip manufacturing to America, in a way because they sense that they will not be able to hold on to Taiwan indefinitely. No. The other driving factor to China being forced to act is the guy, I forget his name, the guy that got elected is the most pro-American Taiwan prime minister or president ever.
Yes, and the
And
KMT, which is traditionally pro-reunification, now, once again, they're the remnants of course, the Chinese nationalists, and their idea of reunification certainly does not meet up eye to eye with the mainland, but they're more amenable to negotiations. They have not managed to score an election victory since the fall of Hong Kong.
mm,
Yeah.
However, I will say, as a counterpoint to that, and as somebody who has been very adamant on the opinion that Taiwan will be bloodlessly retaken, is that you look at trade between Taiwan and the mainland, still by far Taiwan's largest trading partner is mainland China.
No, but plus China could basically just flood them with troops, right? I mean, they have enough disposable bodies more than anybody, maybe more than India, but not as much as India. But you know, that's I just don't see a war with Taiwan happening. If it does, I predict it would be a huge embarrassment for the transnational progressive empire, because there will be enough people in terms of economics within Washington and within Brussels and within London to say that, okay, supplying China's main enemy during a war would not be very good, and it would disrupt pretty much everything. So, I mean, I don't know. But then again, I mean, I can't bank on the rationality, especially. Again, like I say, if coconuts gets in, then I can't really bank on the rationality of Washington. But at the end of the day, any sort of military action or sanction against China, I don't really, not that I'm pro-Chinese or anything, obviously, far from it, but I don't really see the economic logic in it, to put it bluntly. It would be a disaster. They would basically have to concede Taiwan to China in that sense. Would that be very good for the power of Western powers? No. Would it mean that China would be more assertive on the world stage more than they already are? Yes. It would translate into a bloody nose for America in particular. But the risk of actually engaging in any sanction war or any overt conflict with China would just, I don't know. I can't really. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
I don't know.
Because I know that Biden, he was like really adamant about Taiwan, that the Taiwanese are just like, they're they love liberty and freedom and so forth, and doing the whole bit about the proxy war next to, yeah. But like, I don't know if there's enough will to pursue another pivot to Asia in terms of military action. I don't know.
I just don't think it's there. And you look at China's influence with its neighbors, even the ones that it traditionally is at very harsh odds with. And I bring this point up about Vietnam all the time, that
Yeah.
Vietnam, ever since the end of the Vietnam War, has been staunchly anti-China, whether by the sponsorship of the Soviet Union or later the United States in more recent years. You even look at what some of their policies are and what public opinion is there. Uh, I'm not going to say that they've become pro-China, but there has been a softening of opinion. Same case in the Philippines, where there has been very much a softening of opinion with that. Korea is a whole situation in and of itself. Japan, of course, you do have the constant saber rattling of the constant between both sides, and you've seen some Chinese aircraft actually recently violate Japanese airspace. But once again, you look at the economics, you look at trade between the two countries, it has increased. Even under these so-called nationalist, very staunchly anti-China forces within Japan in the leadership, the past couple prime ministers, you still see trade increasing. And
Yeah, yeah.
like I said,
Yeah.
I've talked about this previously. India, in terms of China's neighbors and China's neighborhood, is probably the biggest threat, especially in terms of BRICS. But once again, the West has nothing to offer to India in order to get it to turncoat. There's just nothing there. They can smooth out the problems. I'm not saying they're going to have good relations with the Chinese. I'm not even going to say they're going to have productive relations with the Chinese. But in terms of what the West can do to win over India, it's just not there. They were able to kind of do it with Pakistan, especially with getting rid of Imran Khan. But in terms of India, I could be wrong, but I just simply don't think it's there. And we're also going down into Southeast Asia and some of the bigger Pacific nations. You think maybe Indonesia, Malaysia. Once again, Malaysia's prime minister, his name escapes me, has walked back a lot of his recent anti-Chinese rhetoric. Once again, Indonesia is one of those cases in and of themselves. But when we're talking about the Straits, especially when it comes to Chinese trade routes, Straits of Malacca, Malaysia was one of the key countries that was supposed to be securing that. And in the event of a potential crisis, Malaysia was supposed to cooperate with the United States, with Western powers, in order to shut that off. Well, like I said, you have the prime minister walking that back. And while China's surrounding countries might not like them, they see the value in partnership. And that in terms of the war for influence, I'm not even going to necessarily say the Chinese are winning, but the American empire is certainly losing.
I mean, ultimately, like, it could come down to just the Chinese saying, okay, keep the American, to the 200 American Marines here, but we want a base, like our own version of what Cuba has. Right, we want to be able to expand outside of the first chain of islands around China. Right, that's what they would have to. Maybe that's a possibility. I don't know, but again, the next 4 or 5 months could be very interesting. Now, America has moved every carrier outside of the South Pacific and the China Sea in order to deal with the Middle East, which gives you an idea of just like how precious Israel is to America.
Mm-hmm. No, but that's what I mean, though. It's there could be an event that wavers America's support for Ukraine, and if you don't have military production there, then, well, what are you going to do? I mean, I put it this way. The USM cares more about supplying Israel with missiles than it does Ukrainians. That's just a fact. And if there was a serious threat from Iran in particular, then we'll see what happens. Now, I know that recently, I know that the Duran was covering this. They say that Putin, his escalation would be that if they were to strike within Russia, deeper into Russia, such as Moscow, that he would then begin to supply various enemies of America, because America does have a lot of foreign bases, especially in the Middle East, and it could translate into bases getting bombed through other proxies. Now, I don't know how serious that threat is, or what escalation would look like if the Ukrainians were to bomb within Russia. It could be that. It could just be not really caring about civilian casualties in places like Kiev. But it definitely would have some sort of geopolitical ramification. And so I don't know how serious Putin is about that. I mean, we'll see what happens.
There is some recent news. I guess we did kind of skip over the Poltava thing.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, because it's connected to that, I guess. Yeah.
So there was a major strike on Poltava, I believe September the 3rd. And the first numbers that were coming out were something like 41 dead, 120 injured. Then it went up to 47, 200 injured, 51, 200 injured. However, later in the day, and then the following day in the morning, there was a young woman, a Ukrainian woman in Poltava, and a man roughly 10 years older than her that made their own videos, and now a third one. So that young woman put out a video saying 210 dead, hundreds injured. Then the older guy with the beard, there's two of them actually. He's younger than me. He's just older than her. So he was saying over 770 dead. This guy here, about 700 dead. Commander of the reconnaissance unit of the armed forces of Ukraine, Yaroslavsky. That is what he said. Since the Swedes were confirmed to be on the ground via video, because there was a video of a guy who got very badly injured, and the poor guy, his right leg is like torn to shreds. Like the flesh, the muscles looked like a souffle. Like it was horrendous to look at. Either he or somebody is not speaking Ukrainian, not any Slavic language, because I can tell the difference between Ukrainian, Slav, and Polish and Russian easily. Like they're not speaking any of them, and to me it sounded like one of the Scandinavian Germanic countries, and it was confirmed. Another account had the translation. So that was interesting. Now, was supposed to be a cadet area for future pilots and also drone pilots. Remember that back in July, the Russians attacked in Kiev near the hospital. They destroyed a building that housed, well, there were actually two strikes. One of them was further down south from the strike near the hospital, which since Soviet times has been like an aviation university for a military academy. That's what this building was. And two lieutenant colonels were admitted to be killed in Poltava. Additionally, the Poltava City Council has named the teachers of the Military Institute of Communications who died after the Russian missile strike on September the 3rd. Lieutenant Colonel Andrei Alexievich Nazarenko, born November 14th, 1971. Lieutenant Colonel Sergei Nikolaevich Duduk, who was born on September 3rd, 1973, and Major Sergei Vladislavovich Andreychuk, who was born on March 30th, 1969. Vitaly Viktorovich Kucheruk was also killed, born in 1993, and he was a training communications platoon instructor. So huge loss. I mean, we're talking minimum like a battalion and a half of. So the other thing that happened was the next day there was an attack similar in Sumy. Then in an open field, about 24 Ukrainians were killed in the Kharkov region. So huge strikes. This is over and above what the Russians are doing in Kryvyi Rog, Zaporozhye City, Kramatorsk, other places of concentrations where you can't really get a verification of how many died or any died. Nikolaev was another one. Remember that
fog of war.
Yeah, fog of war. However, they were, people remember Yaroviv in March, right? And Lvov, that was major hit, well over 100. NATO instructors.
They say Western instructors were there. Yeah.
However, in April of that year, there was also a hit in Nikolaev, or as the Ukrainians call it, Mykolaiv, in the southern part in Kherson. That one was confirmed that over 275 dead. And after this, the Ukrainians would not allow any place to publish them. And lastly, there was another one, I think either Izium or Kharkov City. There was a place that was hit with huge losses. Since then, the Ukrainians.
I think that was Izium, yeah.
That was the hotel,
it was
right?
a hotel. It was a strike with the missile. And
also for the Nikolaev one, weren't there confirmed U.S. quote-unquote advisors in that one as well?
Yes, one of them was like a Langley guy, if I recall. It was like someone, yeah. But it seems to be a pattern that like the news reports it, especially like Kiev Independent people. They report it as like this is like a terror campaign against Ukrainian civilians, but then it later on reveals that it just so happens to be another military target. So Poltava was initially reported as like, I remember seeing this uproar, and I believe some kind of like fucking EU politician is saying like, see, like every single Russian person's responsible for this, blah, blah, blah. But apparently, so it was initially reported as like, this is a terror campaign against Ukrainian civilians, but you're saying that it was a huge aeronautical training center filled with recruits.
Yes.
And so it was a military target in Poltava.
It was, yes.
I'm sure civilians, I will say some civilians probably have died, but not like.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
like especially unfortunately for the people who work there.
Yes, yeah, but but nevertheless, it was still a military target. That they weren't just like randomly popping off civilians.
And actually, what probably sealed their fate was 10 days before the strike. There was an military entourage, that gave a press briefing about how there was going to be a meeting there, like completely insane stuff, like where they're not. Anyways, because like
that's what I mean. Like, how is Russia getting this information from Ukraine?
Well, I mean, like I just said, they made it public.
Oh God.
Yeah, I can send it to Constantine right now, or just this image.
Yeah, I'll get it up in a second.
That's a terrible move.
Yeah, so this, and it's funny because it was on this day that you had all those resignations. Now, the people who resigned, other than Kuleba, do not have like huge power.
No.
Right. And apparently there've been some articles suggesting that the Americans wanted a shakeup.
Is it true 50% of the Ukrainian parliament basically got axed? Or is that like
there were about 7 or 8 people that are part of Zelensky's administration that resigned. Right. Kuleba is the highest profile one because he's their main diplomat. He's their foreign diplomat. He's the one that interfaces in Ramstein, Washington, et cetera.
Yeah, even though this guy could fuck up a cup of coffee, but it's
he's the one who had French fries at the Kiev McDonald's with Antony Blinken.
Well.
You remember that?
That was funny. That was like,
that was so. I love how forced that was.
Well.
Did you know that Real Raw News is reporting that that he's been captured in a Washington D.C. hotel? That he's been there the whole time.
Well,
and he's that Whitehead's White Helmet, real Q Patriots are sending him to Gitmo now.
No,
there you go.
Yeah, are you kidding me?
Real Raw. It's the only news source I trust. Real Raw News. So that was funny. I was reading my old man that article, and we were like laughing. It was pretty funny. But Budanov, he's they had to fight Ukrainian forces because he was being guarded by them, and the Q Patriots. They managed to rout him from the hotel, and anyways, he was seen being hauled off into a black helicopter. So anyways.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Oh, but in all seriousness, no. Yeah. So do you think that there's intelligence leaks within Ukraine?
Oh yeah. All wars have them.
Yeah, because I mean, we all know that there was a huge problem with certain corrupt Ukrainian officers selling off arms, and you have like American made hardware showing up in places as far as Central Africa, places in Asia. So I mean, it wouldn't be that much, I think, to probably have enough corrupt officers to leak intelligence information to the Russians. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, now were these people going to resign that day anyways? I don't know. I do think that day kind of did play a pivotal role because it was just such a major blunder. They know that, I mean, virtually any spot by the Russians in Ukraine can be reached by their Iskanders. And really, the thing that you notice the last 30, 40 days is just how successful the Russians are with their Iskander missiles. Like, well, those HIMARS systems, and they've taken out about 8 since the end of July. Those are happening with Iskanders.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how advanced an Iskander is, technologically speaking. I imagine it's probably one of the older systems, but obviously it's quite effective. So, anyways, yeah, I thought, because that was sort of the big frontline news of the day. Sorry, of the week, of this past week.
Besides Kursk, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's another thing I asked because I sent you this article a week or two ago. I mean, it's just probably, the usual suspects, but they were saying like there were like hundreds of Russian conscripts that were fleeing Kursk, and like there's this floods of them. There's like a whole wave of them that just surrendered to the Ukrainians. And I mean, definitely there has been defections and there has been, conscripts that have fled. But I mean, the operation in Kursk seems to have stagnated somewhat in the Ukrainian side. So
yeah, I mean, I think they gave up because that was the wise thing to do. Now there are videos of Ukrainians brandishing branding irons that they're and electrocuting Russian prisoners. Of course, I saw 2 videos where they send out Russian prisoners unarmed in a field, and then they hunt them with FPV drones. They do this in their own
dangerous game. Yeah.
Yeah. Now the Ukrainians do this to their own defectors or their own prisoners. I've seen various videos by them, so of course they're going to do it to Russians as well. I mean, I don't know. I don't think the numbers. Look, the West wants to feel good. I get it. But the numbers aren't there that they're hoping for, and ultimately what they wanted was a way to slow down for the Russian advance in Donetsk without losing as many men as they would have if they had put them there on the front lines. Because the one thing that they had to deal with was fab bombs, basically ever since the Russians started the offensive in Avdiivka.
Yeah.
Ever since mid-October of last year, the Russians have been getting better at fab bombing and making bigger, heavier bombs. And even Julian Rupke has talked about this. Like, it's just a fact, right? There's like some of the Russian breakthroughs are literally just their planes dropping enormously heavy bombs, 3-4 tons. In places that are at the front line of a city, like in the entrance of the city and the main road. And that's how they make their breakthroughs. So they have an enormous radius of death around them when they're dropped. And so, putting the Russians off balance and maybe even taking over the Kursk nuclear power plant would have been what it would have taken for the Russians to reconsider. But that didn't happen. The Russians have not diverted, like they're not going to move away from their mission in Donetsk. They want to get to that point where Donetsk city never has to worry about being attacked by Ukrainians again. Now, I should say this week, 3 citizens, including a 15-year-old boy, were killed in the city. But that southern pocket I keep talking about is going to be one of those pivotal things that will have to be taken care of. So, that's what we're seeing.
So you're saying that essentially Kursk was a way of pulling off Russian troops from their offensive lines, right?
Yes.
Because it doesn't seem like they do have a plan besides to go further and further. And I guess the Nafo fantasy is that they're going to reach Moscow one day next year. But apart from that, it was basically a sort of way to, do some kind of like sadist revenge fantasy on Russian citizens while also boosting morale, while also trying to pick apart the Russian forces to not commit as much troops to the front.
Yes. To divert them.
Yeah, to divert them. But it's kind of backfired because they have been taking swaths of land.
I mean, like, like I said, the Russians, August was a very good month for the Russians in terms of taking land. But the land that they're taking, basically per square kilometers, there's something like 151 people.
Yeah.
Kursk, those number of people per square kilometers, 37, right? This is a much more densely populated area. 80% of these trench networks were already constructed 8, 9, 10 years ago. They're not new. And really, you don't get to have the Donbass unless you destroy them or work around them or meet them head on. One way or another, you have to get rid of those trench networks that were created by the Ukrainians, right? Yeah. Like, that's what it is. That's what it's going to take. So,
I think the biggest accomplishment of the Kursk offensive at the end of the day is the fact that it saved Sumy a few months. And you don't have Russian troops there because of that, and that's really the only thing you can say. And if you want to go in the other direction to the furthest end, you could say this doomed the Ukrainian war effort, which I don't want to say that entirely, but it has been a major setback in order to prevent a potential offensive on Sumy, which I think was one of the primary reasons in the first place. And I also do want to say, in terms of Russian land being occupied, when that point gets brought up, I'm not downplaying Kursk. It is an embarrassment, especially because it's pre-1991 Russia. It is Russia proper.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, it's total embarrassment.
But by all intents and purposes. But I do want to point out that as far as Russian law is concerned, internally speaking, the occupied parts of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, that is also technically Russian-occupied territory, because they did hold the votes, they did hold the referenda in those territories, and they were officially annexed into the Russian Federation. So, as far as, at least on paper, and I know that when that translates in reality, it becomes something much different, that all is occupied Russian land, the parts that the Ukrainians still control on that. So, I guess you could make the argument that they need to be driven out one way or another, and that however many square kilometers of Russia is under foreign occupation. But I don't want to make that argument. I've heard it made before. I just wanted to bring it up because I do think Kursk being pre-1991 Russia is much different than, say, what we see happening in, maybe not Donetsk, because I do think that holds a certain amount of significance, but say Kherson or Zaporozhye.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you remember back in June, before I took time off, I brought you that article. Well, not an article, but an interview that was done with was it Kosin or Kotkin? Anyways, he's a Russian Jewish guy, and he's very pro-America, and he's talking really brass taps about what the military situation in Ukraine is, and he says that America inherited the Anglo-English model of warfare, superb Navy, of course, later the Air Force, and expeditionary, highly trained professional expeditionary units, well equipped, not a steppe army, capable of sustaining enormous losses, right? That's not the American or the English way. One of the reasons why Vietnam was never going to be successful was because the Americans are just not willing to lose that many men, particularly after World War II. Even then, they took some of the least, but an enormous number in comparison in the rest of American history. Okay, so that aversion is what defines a country's military, right? It's those cultural and political aspects. So this is why the West overestimates the amount of embarrassment that they must have caused in Russia. Like, only the most Westoid Russian would overestimate this, right? It can be overstated. And so, like I said earlier when the show started, Russia has a history of giving up territory for time. And I think they knew right away what the Ukrainians wanted to achieve. Um, Again, I think Putin should at least have, because of course, this wasn't like a Russian trap. He's like, well, yeah, I can spare 2,000 civilians, 102 conscripts, no problem.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, Hitler is evil. He's not that evil. Yeah, that's just my estimation. I just think like reactively, this is like part of their culture. When that happens, they all know what to do next. It's literally like it's not like 1 century. It's like 2, 3, 4 centuries of this type of way of waging warfare and judging what warfare is and should be. So very different mindset, and people just are not really grown up about it.
Yeah. I mean, that is a slap. Like that's the Eastern European way, is huge losses of men and equipment and so forth. And it's a different mindset totally. But how come the Ukrainians didn't play this hand before? Was it just to protect Sumy, or was it that they finally decided that there's enough desperation to have this, because the summer offensive petered out and nothing really came of it? So were they sort of always planning to incur into Russia this way in the easiest way possible? Or was it that just they decided, well, how are we going to distract Russia significantly enough to stop making these gains in various other places? Like, I don't know.
Well, they have tried something like this before.
Yeah.
Into areas that are, okay, it's not Russia, but it's an area that's important to Russia, and that's Transnistria. And a lot of people are even speculating now that that might be something that they might try again, right? That there were some attacks, 1 or 2 civilians were killed. There were several attacks over the course of the year. Not this year, but in 2022, and I think maybe once in 2023. So by doing that, they might have something to gain. I know there's a nuclear power plant there, and Moldova depends on that nuclear power plant in Transnistria. Apparently, there's also huge amounts of Soviet-era 152 millimeter shells and all kinds of other armaments, and even some, other military systems. The Ukrainians still need them. Those are still valuable to some degree, no matter how old they are, for some kinds of attacks. And it would put Russia at odds. Like Russia would have to choose defending Transnistria or defending the Donbass, but every time the Ukrainians have tried to do that, they have backed off. My suspicion is that the Americans want them to back off. NATO might have helped organize this attack into Kursk, and uncharacteristically, they might have been for it this time, but it appears to me like some people within the Biden administration probably are not happy about it. Especially because it's not paying off the kind of dividends that they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't capture a city. They didn't look. At the end of the day, it was a desperate move. Like Ukraine has done many, many desperate moves. Like they're asking for more missiles, but the same kind of missiles that they've been receiving from the U.S. to attack Russia proper. But they spent hundreds and hundreds upon hundreds of missiles from America, from France, from Germany, to attack the Kursk bridge.
Yeah.
Right? Like, think how fruitless and stupid this was. But they need to do stuff like this because they need the morale. Like, you're dealing, like, both the Ukrainians and their kind of naivete and Western audiences that have been under so much, like, cultural simulacra for so long that they don't understand wars, and they think, oh yeah, this incursion, yeah, it's like, wars are a lot like sporting events. I mean, right? Like, this is really good news. Like, look what they're doing now.
It's like the Chiefs defeating the Ravens. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like it. I feel like I understand war. So that's the kind of public you're dealing with, right? On the one hand, you have the Ukrainian public that's dying for any good news. Yeah. And so is the Western public, but coming at it from two radically different points of view, right? The revenge factor for the Ukrainians is much higher, right? That kind of alleviates the pain, but it's it's less so for the Westoids, because for them it's kind of like it's always an ongoing war with Russia, blah blah blah.
There's always a degree of like normie sadism against Russia. Yeah, like
yeah,
fuck them, they all deserve it. They all, yeah, exactly.
It's like whatever. So, and it's not like they don't give a shit about Ukraine. They like Ukraine now, right? But when the war's over, they'll soon forget Ukraine. So
I think they'll actually be what we saw in the lead up to the Ukraine war, because around 2018, 2019, it looked like Minsk 2 was just going to be the status quo for the foreseeable future. You did get articles in mainstream media publications, the far-right training camps of Ukrainian nationalists, and the quote-unquote neo-Nazi problem of Ukrainian nationalists. And you got
I saw those articles.
FT, Bloomberg. I don't think it went as big as Washington Compost.
The CBC, they talked about the Canadian general that trained Azov.
Yes. But you did see this, and I do think that as this goes on, as the war, they will actually be, possibly they use that as an out for Ukraine if they want to dump the project. They say it's full of dangerous far-right radicals. We're enabling the quote-unquote global far-right network, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, you know what I think?
Go ahead.
No, you finish, Constantine.
No, that's more or less all. That's more or less what I had to say about that.
Okay, it's kind of like, what I think is that to give an out to them, there would have to be like an analogous thing with this recent tenant media bullshit that certain people, not to name the guy because I don't want to fucking him on my ass, about like, well, this is like a joint op, this is like an entrapment op between Russian intelligence and American intelligence. I think that's bullshit. But like, I don't know, the to say that like Russian intelligence is cooperating with America is like, I don't know. You would have to have an analogous thing where, okay, we know that there's certain far-right figures in Europe and America, not to name names, God forbid I name names. We know that there's certain far-right figures that are sympathetic to Ukraine and America that may or may not be cooperating with certain forces in Ukraine, or at least have sort of like a kissing cousin relationship with them, right? If you were to say that Ukraine is a hotbed of far-right activity, that there's a lot of people in the West actually who are sympathetic to Ukraine, who are also far-right, who traffic in the same memes and so forth, you would basically have to blow up that operation that may or may not have, probably may have, been set up by Western intelligence agencies to begin with. You would have to basically out a lot of pro-Ukrainian white nationalists in America and in Germany and in France and in Britain.
Yeah, the Western world. But
yeah, you'd have to do the same as like Lauren Chen with tenant media and allegedly being paid off by Russians, or various alleged Duganist money going in the hands of right-wing publishers that are more sympathetic to Russia. Again, not to name, again, this is all alleged. I mean, I have a heavy degree of skepticism, but let's just say for argument's sake that this is a reality. You would have to blow up the networks that various intelligence agencies have been cultivating anyways between Ukrainian far-right people and far-right people in North America and in continental Europe. Because that would give them an out to say that we kind of fucked up, we kind of like foster, because you have to realize that nobody in the West, I mean, there has been leaks, there has been emissions, but when it comes to radical Islam, for instance, and the way that was cultivated by MI6, Mossad, the CIA, there has been no like overt emission because there hasn't been a need to do that. There's people like, you could read, for example, a really great book would be the Blumenthal one, Management of Savageries. That's a really good resource to understand the connections there. And he gets certain things wrong about the right wing in North America, but whatever, right? There has been no need because there's no like real salient cultural impact, maybe more so in Europe, but not in North America when it comes to like radical Islam, right? Apart from like the usual like jihad type of shit that people have largely moved on from. But far-right politics has become very salient in terms of the ruling transnational progressive elite, in terms of like the ultimate othered boogeyman, right? So at a moment's notice, if things were going really bad in Ukraine, I don't think that like pro-Ukrainian white nationalists are in a very good footing with the intelligence agencies that have communications and who have various friends in these Ukrainian far-right battalions. I would imagine that they would be on the next list of the quote-unquote foreign influence busts if things went really bad. If they needed out to say, like, listen, the Ukrainians are white nationalists, they're evil right-wingers, they're racist, they're anti-Semitic, whatever. I think that they could feed enough of those people into the wheat thresher to justify saying that, listen, we're gonna wash our hands of this, because they will do it very publicly in a way that Western intelligence agencies funding radical Islam is not really ideologically salient, the way that it would be to say that, well, all these like do you remember this is such a stupid fucking example. I don't know why I'm bringing this up. Do you remember that blood tribe thing in Tennessee?
Kinda.
The blood tribe, the hammer stream guy. Do you remember that one guy full of tattoos? He's like, Slava Ukraina. And he like had pictures of like, apparently he like legitimately was a Ukrainian volunteer that was like in a far right battalion or whatever, right? Those people, they're going to get fucked if Ukraine loses this war, in my opinion, because it's very easy, especially if you have a Democrat in the White House, to say that, well, these guys are far right and they're evil and we have to root them out. And we know that like Russian influence is bad, and we know that Russia like funding right-wing figures on the other side is the current news du jour right now.
Oh, here's the line: we can't stoop down to their level.
Exactly. So that guy in the blood tribe or whatever, or other sympathetic white nationalists to Ukraine, I could imagine they would also get fucked as well if things go really bad.
That does remind me, digging into the War Report archives, a story from 2019 that I know GSP will remember because we actually recently talked about this, but I don't know if you've heard of it, Gio. About those Italian far-rightists who tried to assassinate Salvini after smuggling in the air missile. And the reason they did that is because they said he was too pro-Russia and that he was going to sell out Ukraine. But like, yeah, you have these kind of networks all across North America.
That smacks of some Gladio activity right there.
Oh,
but maybe it could be organic, and who knows. But you were going to say, Konstantin, yeah.
But to further your point, they have these kind of networks all over Europe, and of course they've had them, as you just said, since the days of Gladio. That it's all just repurposed, and we know that. And I hadn't considered it before. I haven't really given much thought that way. But yeah, very feasibly, they can scuttle these networks, and that's a very easy out for them. Especially if this all goes haywire, these people are realistically going to be of no use because, and like you said, I don't want to point any fingers, name any names, because frankly, I don't know enough, and I'm also not looking to bicker with people unnecessarily. But the purpose has been served, and there have been a lot of actors, whether big name, small name, whoever, who have been trying to funnel support for more, I guess you could say, quote-unquote, dissident elements into a pro-regime position, that being war in Ukraine. And you've seen to a lesser extent them trying to weave this around, like, to support Israel as well. To less success, Ukraine's been a much easier sell on something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't want to say
some of them believe that the Russians are still supportive of Israel, which I can't understand that one. That's the Russian Israel, the Russian Israelis. I can't wrap my head around that one because, I mean.
No, and I actually have some interesting news about Syria that we'll get into.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
This is actually breaking news. I got this as the show is happening. So let's see. Doing the math, that would have been like, probably about midnight local time in Syria. There were 15 Israeli airstrikes across Syria, including in Damascus, which is the largest number of strikes since, I don't know, probably about 2018, 2019. And you had
maybe even 2016, probably.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because Israel really stepped up operations after the U.S. didn't commit to further action in 2018, if you recall.
Oh yes,
but
that's when Wagner was operating in Aleppo at that time. If
yeah,
I recall.
that's when that big skirmish happened, bit early 2018. But this is the largest strike in years. This is very reminiscent of what we did see in 2018 and 2019 coming from the Israelis. Apparently, Syrian air defenses have been activated and they have intercepted some missiles. We'll see what the ultimate damage is by the time everything's said and done because, like I said, this just happened within the past, 20 minutes.
Oh, shit. No, but that's what I mean. Like, it's very, I mean, if you are a pro-Ukrainian white nationalist, then it's very... I've noticed that there's been this attempt to link Russia with Israel. And geopolitically, it doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe if this was years ago, perhaps.
No, I think it was last episode or the episode before, we actually talked about the burning of bridges between Russia and Israel.
Yes, yeah. No, but they would say that that's all kayfabe, though. That's, I mean, in terms of like...
everything's a puppet show, everything's an op, nothing happens organically, of course.
In terms of like subverting American democracy or whatever. So, do we want to talk about the tenant media thing? Or,
I mean, if you have more to say on it, because I think that I don't have much to say beyond that, like, okay, it's the same crap we've seen since Russiagate, and that they found $10 million worth of Russian money in some alt media outlet, and
to produce Cispito coal.
The most damning thing that they funded, like, basic online conservative stuff, maybe slightly edgier than what you get from, say, a Daily Wire. I mean, once again, we're talking about Tim Pool is probably like the least offensive, like, quote unquote alt media commentator you could ever find. Once again, no strong opinions on the guy because, like I said, what's there to have an opinion on? But I digress. Even with...
Well, they were saying that, like, because Tim Pool and Lauren Chen, that they were, like, taking more of an anti-Trump position. Like, for example, certain other people in this network, they've distanced themselves from it. And they said because they've been taking more of an anti-Trump position. And recently, I mean, I think he was just, honestly... I think he was joking. It's probably just Russian humor. But did you see, like, Putin said...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, his endorsements.
Yeah, he endorses Kamala Harris. I mean, that's clearly bullshit.
She has a delightful laugh.
Yeah. She knows what she's doing. Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he said multiple times, and probably most notably in the Tucker Carlson interview, but you listen to interviews with other media that will actually still talk to him, is that it doesn't matter who's in power in the U.S. The administrative state is so entrenched, you're not going to get any change, so I don't care who's in the White House at that point.
Yeah. Could I just say something? Because this ties into what we were talking about with Israel and this. Okay, so basically what Western governments need to do about the right wing, right, is to herd them towards certain positions, right?
Yeah.
Mostly those positions, they want to focus on international issues rather than domestic issues. The problem that the West constantly has with regards to the right-wing elements and right-wing parties, and especially disaffected right-wing men, is those men critiquing America and critiquing America's partners like Israel, right? From the right, not from the left.
Okay. Oh, yeah, very dangerous from the right. Yeah.
Okay, yes, right? That's far more dangerous to them, right? So by trying to associate through some 4D explanation how this is all just a co-op, that's there to enforce the message for, like, on just stupid, like really stupid, low intelligent Westoids. I sent Constantine some stuff a few days ago, and there's nothing like finding these guys on let's say on what's it, Mark Collette's Telegram channel.
Yes. Okay,
so if somebody says something, it may or may not have anything to do with Russia, right? But like, for instance, something came up about, like, Israelis raping young men, or no, this one was about the Swedish army flying the pride flag and saying this is a flag worth fighting for. And somebody in the comments section.
Oh, I saw
said,
that ad. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Ad, yeah.
So somebody in the comments section said something to the effect of, yeah, somebody. I'm going to send you these. Konstantin, I have to send you these. This is hilarious. You have to post this in the chat.
And keep in mind, okay. Mark Collette's been pretty solidly not pro-Russia, but at least skeptical of the.
He's skeptical. Yeah. He's doing exactly what they don't want. He wants to focus. He wants to focus on the domestic issues. He's not going to be herded. He's not going to divert his energy towards some grand, larger geopolitical struggle.
You want to know why?
While the government constantly goes against whatever position, whatever the issues that the right wingers have concerns for their own native population, right?
You want to know why? Listen, not to say I agree with Mark Collette and everything. This isn't an endorsement, but the reason why is because he could go into fucking jail in Britain for what he says. That's why he wants to focus on domestic. Of course, and his friends have gone to jail.
Yes.
So. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, Konstantin, put up the.
Hold on, I'm working.
Okay. Yeah. Oh my God. So I see guys like this in his chat all the time, even when it has nothing to do with Russia.
So, sorry, the computer.
Okay, so I'm
here's
Geo. I'm going to send these to you.
Here's frame one, just so everyone gets an idea. All right, we're going to go into part 2, just so everyone can see a sequence here. Here's the beginning of the comments. So, yeah, there's that.
Are they saying Z-er? Is that what they're...
So this guy's name is Anglo-Saxon God, and his AVI is literally Hitler. There's another guy who posts stuff like this, and he has like a German knight with a Nazi helmet on.
Oh,
the knight is on a horse, and he's going up this narrow path towards a castle.
That's from the Nordic, the posters. Yeah.
It's so ridiculous. So these guys, and this is why Feds often poses these guys, right? Is they need the right-wing populations in Western countries focused on Russian enemies, just like they use Poles, Lithuanians, and Ukrainians focused on their enemies, which is Russia, right? They cannot have these people critiquing their policies for their own countries, right? Forget about those domestic policies, your replacement, how people born in the US, their jobs are shrinking, but service industry jobs are increasing for people who aren't citizens yet here.
We're dropping 100K Haitians in the middle of nowhere.
Right. So forget about that. Just focus on Russia, right? And with guys like, Johnson, like these idiots, it always will work on them, right? Or, I don't know, Richard Spencer. So you'll always find, and I've sent like Konstantin these guys like before, like they're hilarious. For me, they're hilarious. If I find the image of the guy on the Nazi knight, it's too hilarious.
Oh, that's funny.
but it's these guys, right? These are the guys who think like, oh no, there's a secret pact, and it's between Russia, Israel, and America. And part of the reason they do this is because we're incredibly smart, we're incredibly clever, and we're discovering and revealing their plans. So that's why they have to use these convoluted 3D, 4D, 5D chess moves, right? So that you don't figure it out. That's how dumb they are. Like, that's the level of stupidity you're dealing with. Instead of like the facts on the ground. Like, imagine wasting all this time and money, right? Like just to fool the population, right? I can't,
No, but I think like no, like, what I would say, I have to be careful. Is that no?
We always have to be careful.
Yeah, no doubt that there probably is some Russian money going around for like top figures to produce coal, right? Now Tim Pooley, he fucking put the Ukrainian flag in his handle and he said, I didn't know anything about it. But Lauren Chen, they deleted her and her producers' YouTube channels. No real quarter, no actual papers has gotten out. And keep in mind that this foreign influence bill was never like really treated seriously in America. Constantine, you probably know more about this.
Yeah, the FARA Act, which realistically,
it was always a paper tiger, more or less.
I heard nothing until they forced RT to register under it a couple years back.
Yeah.
But I just want to make a side note that this program right here, we have not taken a single Russian cent. In fact, we've actually lost money on this program.
Yeah, we do it for free. Yeah, it's just
I've put more into this than I've gotten out. I mean, these headsets, you can tell by the audio quality, they're not the best headsets. I like to walk around. These things kind of get beat up after like a year or two, and they're like $20 a piece, and the price only goes up. But yeah, I just want to say that we've lost money on this. But yeah,
I don't take any money from Russia.
Getting back to your point, that it's $10. It's minuscule. They want to bring up the FAR Act. They want to say these people were foreign agents, etc., etc. Once again, trying to drudge up this
Cold War pastiche kitsch nonsense.
Yes, this idea of Russian influence around every corner. When I don't want to downplay the FSB. I'm not saying it's an incompetent organization, or I suppose in this case it would be the GRU, Foreign Intelligence. But Russian Foreign Intelligence, I mean, we're supposed to believe that the same organization that could not prevent the Maidan is also responsible for puppet mastering
stealing the American election
every
in
political
2016,
event that has happened in the West since the Maidan.
It's all Russia.
That's the dual narrative they're presenting. Of course, the Russia that's on the brink of collapse, but also on the brink of world domination. And it just takes whatever nonsense, whatever. Well, we're the main character. This is some Hollywood movie, and we got to stop the plot in its tracks.
Well, the thing is, though, that every fucking U.S. politician takes foreign influence money, from China to Israel to even India here in Canada. Gulf states, you name it, right? Like, it's just, I understand taking foreign money is bad, but this is what I said this on Twitter. Like, okay, traitors. They're traitors to what? They're traitors to a government that hates them. They're traitors to you can't really have a notion of a citizen being loyal to a state without knowing what that state or what that citizenry even is.
Also, treachery by taking money from a country that we're not in a state of war with and still have diplomatic ties.
Right.
I mean, it's bog standard corruption at the very worst.
Yes, exactly. Not to say I condone taking Russian money or whatever, but I'm saying that this has been a boon for fucking normie Israel firster conservatives like Will Chamberlain I saw, and Seth Dillon, and other people. Who else did I see like this? Even like some fucking anonymous callers. Who Constantine?
The crowd of usual suspects.
Right. That have been saying, see, all these dissident right people, they're being funded by Russia to hate Israel, to post memes, and that actually there's, you talk about dual loyalty, but what about dual loyalty to Russia? This is what they've been going with. This has been this tenant media thing with Lauren Chen has been an absolute boon for them, because they've been saying that, all these people talk about the Israel lobby and AIPAC. That's not real. You know what is real? Russian influence. That's real. That's Will Chamberlain literally said that and it's so no, it's all bullshit.
Like,
and we're saying you have people who
Max Boot here in Canada, Andrew Coyne saying that all the truckers, you weren't actually pissed off at Trudeau for locking down your whole fucking existence. No, it was actually just the Russians that convinced you that lockdowns are evil. That's what Andrew fucking piece of shit cockroach Coyne. That's what he said. And other Canadian media figures as well. It was all Russia. They all funded these Wignats that were part of the convoy that have the fucking Diagolon meme or whatever the fuck it is that I'm not affiliated with, by the way. they were all taking Russian money, and they're all Duginists, and Millerman's a Duganist, and Jeremy McKenzie's a Duganist, and they're all taking Russian money. And actually, it wasn't because Trudeau basically tried to destroy your life for maybe 3 years. No, it's all the Russians. They convinced you that your business going under because of the lockdowns, that was bad.
And you know
it was
what?
all Russian money.
All of that
because of Lauren Southern taking money. Because maybe Ezra Levant was taking. Oh, actually, I shouldn't say that. Because Ezra Levant gets his funding elsewhere. But it's like, it's so fucking stupid. All these like retarded all these libtards and these retarded conservatards, they've all been they've had such like this orgy of praise over the DOJ. Because when the DOJ was targeting pro-lifers, for instance, under Biden, that was bad. But you're gonna believe the DOJ now because of Russian influence.
It's always like this. Yeah, it's like at the end of the day, all these right towards.
There's no such thing as Israel. There's no such thing as AIPAC. That's a lie. Israel would never try to corrupt Western conservatards. They would never give money to the Daily Wire, for instance. But
AIPAC literally brags that 98% of the people they backed, in elections in the U.S. have won.
Yeah.
They literally brag that each politician has at least one AIPAC member that follows and keeps tabs on him.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, and you know what? I mean, so what if Russia did? I mean, the U.S. does this game in Russia. I mean, who cares? Honestly. But again,
did Qatar pay off a few huge
tubers? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Through Al Jazeera, that's like Qatar has a
remember Morocco funding Biden in 2020, like even Morocco.
Morocco.
And so even going back, like even further back to 2016, you got to remember the entire Steele dossier thing was a product of the MI6.
Yeah, or the Panama Papers
at the behest of Hillary Clinton. People just like don't even mention that, but. Yeah.
Or what about Zelensky and the Panama Papers being funded by various foreign powers?
Yeah.
So, lobbying U.S. officials. Yeah.
I just know that Putin has a net worth of $233 billion allegedly, and apparently he's spending that very well on
coal posters. Like people were making the meme.
Civil War today, he said for the past 600
they paid
days.
Dave Rubin to have. They had paid Dave Rubin used his money to buy children with his husband, quote unquote husband.
You know what? This actually lessens my opinion of Russia because they could have spent this money better.
They could have actually funded like real dissident right wingers. They could have like funded. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I was gonna say somebody, but then some people do believe that dissident writers are getting funded by Russia. Like, I don't know. Can you imagine if Russia started paying like anime racists to make memes? Like that would be a better use of their money.
Well, I think
we were gonna say we cut you off, GSP, but like
go ahead.
Go ahead.
We cut you off.
Yeah, I thought you had something more to say.
Hello.
Yeah, are you there? You had a point to make, GSP?
Oh no! I sent you those photos of the other accounts that are in Mark Collette's channel that pop up every once in a while. Like, I swear they're feds. I know some people think that, and I could be wrong, but
I don't think they're really. I don't want to fed jacket anybody because there is like an organic support. Like there has been.
That's
effort.
true too.
Yeah.
It's just that I just think the way the accounts are constructed, like the aesthetic, is so over the top. It's so ridiculous, right? That they kind of serve both purposes, right? If you begin with the idea that the West wants to round up like the most radical right-wing elements, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to steer them towards being an enemy of Russia, but you also want to keep tabs on them when Russia's less of an enemy. I mean, it's a permanent enemy, but you don't want these guys to turn their attention towards your country, or rather their own country, right? So it's a perfect way to keep tab on them. However, like if I was a Fed and I wanted to round up support, especially like for really young, impressionable, young men, boys, like teenagers,
sensitive
like
young men.
yeah, I would like this is the aesthetic I would choose.
Oh yeah, obviously. But I would say that I would push back by saying that there is like an organic base of appeal, and there is a lot of people that enjoy this aesthetic, for lack of a better term, that have a picture of Russia like they're Asiatic orcs, and that they're actually and to be brutally honest, just because I don't want to like totally zigzag everywhere, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Zigzag. I could admit that is a clever way to Z or I'm trying to avoid it for YouTube because apparently YouTube they still take the GER. You know what I mean? It is a clever meme because it's like calling pro-Russian people brown, and it's like I gotta admit I do chuckle when I see that. But not to zigzag post everywhere, I will say that a lot of this like third worldist rhetoric of Russia is kind of is cringe, and I know that it puts a sour taste in a lot of right-wing people's mouth to do this whole like appealing to the global South bullshit, and that there has been, I mean, there's people that I've seen pro-Ukrainian white nationalists. They believe that like all the migrants are being funded by Russia. There's this one guy on Twitter that says that all the boats are like they're like Russian charter boats, and that there's no such thing as like NGOs in Europe that do this from the West. It's
baloney.
Yeah. But the point being is that like, yeah, there has been instances where Russia has sent migrants to the border of Finland, for instance. And I don't condone that, but I'm just saying that it's more nuanced than people think. And yes, it is true that the Russians do have this like weird third worldist thing going on. But that being said, like, again, I do feel that when people bring it up on the political right, it is to distract from the fact that nations in the West are doing this to their own populations. Not to say that I enjoy when like they do this retarded third worldism, obviously, and not to say that like Russia's going to save us or whatever, but at the end of the day, a lot of people that do bring up these things, they do it because it's like, well, it's a very cold reality to realize that the governments that we live under hate us.
And I will add at that point that you did see this throughout the 90s, a lot of drugs, migrants, guns, whatever, being funneled into Russia, particularly from Central Asia, with the assistance of Western powers. And what this really gets down to, it is a tit-for-tat game. And realistically, this is a game with no winners. And if we had more rational leadership, particularly in the West, we probably could have negotiated some sort of, I guess you could say, truce towards this, where we don't do it to you, you don't do it to us. But clearly, at least one side we know has absolutely zero interest in that. So this is going to continue, and realistically, nobody's going to win from it. And go on.
I was going to say, Constantine, really quickly that, again, like we were saying, like GSP was saying before, it's a consequence of viewing politics as this fucking sports game. Because, for example, there's certain people that say that, Putin wants Kamala because Kamala is inherently, let's say, for to put it nicely, not as politically insightful as anyone else in Washington, and so that if there's like this like accelerationist play that the Russians are playing. But I don't really think that, because I think Putin knows that the USG and the bureaucrats and the sort of transnational progressive bureaucracy, that their policy towards Russia is pretty much set in stone. And I think that obviously would Putin want Trump in there because J.D. Vance is like sympathetic, and that he would probably force Zelensky to the negotiating table. That's more realistic, but I think that it's sort of like, well, of course Putin wants Kamala in there to sort of accelerate the decline. It's like, I don't think they really, I don't think politics happens this way. I don't, what I mean?
Another thing to consider is that you hear this rhetoric going around all the time. Putin wants to destabilize America, but I mean, you look at his previous rhetoric, once again, wanted very conciliatory relations to the West, even though that has soured. Just from a completely pragmatic point of view, Putin has to look at this and he has to realize, while he does want to curtail American influence in his backyard, in his sphere of influence, he doesn't want the American empire to decline too much, because the more it declines, the more belligerent it gets, the more danger there is for Russia, for the rest of the world, the more likely they are to trigger a rash war. So
Yeah.
so he wants to play that game very carefully, where yeah, he wants the Americans out of his backyard. He wants his power block. He maybe extend the same to the Chinese, and he wants the BRICS and all these countries joining BRICS, whatever. But realistically, looking at it as pure pragmatic politics, he doesn't want too much of a decline in the West, because they're still a major power block. They still have nukes. They can still do a lot of damage if they feel like they're pinned in a corner and have no other options.
Plus, the other thing we should remember, the entire trajectory of Russia from the fall of the Soviet Union till now, and for that matter, Putin's trajectory follows the exact same contour. That is, it was a country that wanted to get closer to the West, particularly Europe. Obviously, there were benefits in doing that, and to quell disputes between itself and America, right? And to work as some kind of a strategic partner for, other overall goals, Middle East, terrorism, blah, 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 right? And China did not want a conflict either. And basically, the rise of China, the rise of it as an industrial and economic power, forced the Americans to push Russia away from Europe and into the rest of the world and China, right? That's the trajectory. Like, that's very easy to prove. It's very, very well documented, right? I imagine that there are still Russians that after this war will want to form some kind of new relationship with Europe, or at least some of the European countries.
Yeah.
They're never going to stop wanting to do that, because, Western Russia is still, they look at themselves as Caucasians, as European types, within that larger matrix. And they always will. I attend a Russian Orthodox church, so I know what I'm talking about. And actually, half the congregation is Ukrainian anyway. So, so I went for Holy Unction in February. one of the priests says to me, "Are you Russian or Ukrainian?" I go, "I'm not." He goes, then he starts speaking to me in English, and I go, "No, I'm Macedonian." He goes, "Macedonian?" His arms got so, he gives me this big hug. It was very sweet. But so yeah, I think a lot of people, a lot of geopolitical conspiratards. I hate to be so negative, but they don't think a lot of things through. They're not really honest about human behavior on an individual or group level. So yeah, and besides, I'm sorry, but most of the global South it's not liberal. It's not decadent. I'm sorry, but
No, and the West had the exact same opportunities if they wanted to perpetuate, say, the British or the French Empire. Okay, maybe post-war debts, something like that, wasn't feasible, even though we did see some of that from France. They could have played a very pragmatic policy. They don't need to import millions of these people. They can do what the Chinese are doing. They can build them infrastructure. They can build mines. They can extract the resources, and they can take a pretty fair cut, make some money off of their investments, once again, without having to import millions of these people. But they spurn that every opportunity for, frankly, ideological reasons.
Yeah. Like I would say, even as decadent as the West is, the Russians will still want to reset after this war with Europeans. When that was feasible, I don't know, because there are a lot of bad feelings, but I can guarantee you that is a thought. It is still there. It still persists, and geopolitically, it makes sense.
Yes.
For the Russians to want that.
And talking geopolitically, strategically, once again, the relationship they had with Germany before the war, when it came to cheap energy supplies to Germany, having heavy industry, and then being able to benefit from the more precise and technical industry you had in Germany, it was a very mutually beneficial relationship, and German business interests actually loved Nord Stream because of that. And that's part of the reason why Merkel, despite being very Atlanticist, very much in the American camp, allowed Nord Stream and allowed these economic investments from Russia and into Russia because she was ultimately beholden to a lot of German business interests. Now, that's not to excuse her from, for example, her migrant policy, by no means, but
Right.
and there's a lot of factions in the West, even when it comes down to people who are purely pragmatic, who realize, hey, there's a lot of money to be made with Russia without having to destroy it and pillage it and balkanize it into 10 different countries. So there are a lot of pragmatic elements, and I would say there are even some sympathetic elements. People who do say
Yes,
see the
well
Russians
put.
as something of maybe distant cousins, but cousins nonetheless, the same way they would see any other European group. Now, once again, how many of those people there are, that's up for debate. But I do agree that
there's a
Russia
lot of
will
people
want some
that
European
would
reset at some point.
prefer Russia to deal with than China. I mean, that's why I take exception with Russia, because when it comes to other BRIC nations, like, they don't have the same history with Europe. They don't have the same history with America. You know what I mean? So it's, yeah.
Yeah, out of all the countries you could deal with, out of all the non-Western countries you can deal with, realistically speaking, the Russians are your best bet. I mean, and I'm not even like I've said it many times. At this point, I couldn't care less about posturing against China because I think the situation is so far gone in the West that it just does not matter anymore. India, different situation considering the levels of migration, the fact that they have become a everyday reality for a lot of people, especially in the Anglosphere. You can take more issue with that as it stands. But in terms of like cooperation, like with these other non-Western powers, I think anyone who is being honest with themselves and isn't driven by any sort of just say ethnic animus, say somebody who would be like Polish or Lithuanian or Baltic or whatever, would admit that as far as the Westerners are concerned, Russians are a far preferable partner and alternative than really any of the other major options out there.
Yeah. Also remember that this war is not just about Ukraine. This war is America coming to terms with the loss of its influence. It's a problem that goes back, easily before 2008. There was a time when the British pound was worth twice that of the American dollar, and you had a lot of Brits visiting America in the 90s and 2000s. There was a time where the Canadian dollar was worth more than
that was great. You used to go over the border and buy stuff.
Yeah. Right. I remember that. Between 2005 and 2008, of the 500 wealthiest corporations in the EU and America, it was split 50-50. Like, that is like your EU corporations are now like less than half the size of American corporations. Like, America needs to have an area that they can guarantee they're going to use their dollar, or they're going to peg their dollar on the US dollar, right? That's
pre-2008 numbers are insane when it comes to European industry. I mean, the EU economy up until 2007, it wasn't until the financial crisis was actually larger collectively, talking about all the EU states collectively at that point, larger than the US economy. Just barely, but still.
Yeah. But what about the theory? I saw this one theory by, again, not to name names, but because this guy's an admitted informant, that I was lurking these Twitter spaces, that basically both the US, like the State Department, and Russia, they're more or less getting what they want out of the war. Russia gets to posture in terms of BRIC nations. They get to rein in a historical rival. But the Americans, they get to push them further into the hands of the Chinese, and then they also get to subjugate the Europeans. So it's like, maybe there
there's
will
no
be a
question
reality.
They want a weaker, like, there's no question they want a weaker Russia, but they want, like, it's not just a weaker Russia. Like, what they want ultimately, what they wanted, if you join both the British Empire and the American Empire, overall, except for some periods of time, for the last 200 years, both empires have tried to balkanize Russia into smaller pieces, right? For the US, most recently, it was the fall of the Soviet Union, right? Of course, the EU members, America, many of their think tanks make no secret that they want this.
Yeah.
Ever since the SML, and still do. That's the Russia that they want. Like, it's wrong to assume that they just want like this Russia but weaker. They want this Russia but weaker if
Putin is dead.
If balkanization is inevitable, right? And like people who sell out their own country, like most European leaders, that's what they want.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, that does make exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. But what was I gonna say? Do you have anything on that, Constantine?
No, I have nothing to add.
Yeah. Anyways, going back to the tenant media thing, I mean, no one's gonna fucking remember this in a few weeks, and it's just.
Now, I asked. I mean, do they know for sure, or is this like speculation?
They allege that Lauren Chen and others have cut deals, and that's the reason the persecution records haven't actually been made public, and that they're probably seized their assets or whatever. And there's other right-wing figures, one kid in particular who's distancing himself from it, who used to like zigzag post, but now he's like, oh, I don't really care about it. And there's other ones like Tim Pool and Dave Rubin. They allege that they were taken in, that they didn't know anything about it. And so there's not been a whole lot of transparency over it, apart from this DOJ leak that then these like pro-Ukrainian libtard journalists have like blasted everywhere because it proves their retarded Russiagate theories.
Right. There are no Russians who are fighting on behalf of Israel, but there are many Ukrainians who are, right?
No, but the thing is, though, is that these people, from a libtard perspective, these people, they've been turning their backs on Trumpism, especially Lauren Chen and even Tim Pool. And so was it that the Russians thought that they were going to be Trump MAGA people, or is it just that, you know what I mean? Like the picture isn't clear because these people haven't been doing the whole like MAGA pro-Trump thing. Like Lauren Chen used her opportunity to critique Trump over the recent pro-life uproar thing, right? So from a libtard narrative, these people aren't like the Kremlin isn't funding like pro-Trump people, which is so hilarious that they're using. Well,
I mean, if you were like one of the most powerful countries in the world, and you saw like what Trump was able or not able to accomplish, I mean, would you? He's like even more fervently pro-Israel than before. He constantly brings it up. If I don't become president, Israel's not going to exist. It's like, don't threaten me with a good time. But like whatever, I don't know. Like, maybe some of these people fell for it. Maybe some of them wanted it. Like, what happened in 2016? Like Russia literally invested about $40,000 in Facebook posts for both left wing and right wing. Like all they wanted was more chaos in the U.S.
Yeah.
Right.
No, Russia,
they made like this
communists and
there are literally like people who aren't even millionaires who invested more money in the 2016 election campaigns of Hillary and Trump. I mean, $40,000 is like nothing. All that is a way of kind of feeling out where the American public is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I see it. I see it as like kind of like an experiment. This is nothing. I mean, the average person pays more for a car. I mean,
they alleged they gave tenant media $10 million.
Yeah, that's what they allege. I know.
Yeah.
I know.
No, but you're right though. Like even $10 million doesn't really go a long way compared to the other countries that lobby U.S. officials and media people. So it's just they fund like weirdos on the left too. They fund like weirdo fucking tankies and Hozoids, and MAGA and Jackson Hinkle's probably taking money from Russia.
Probably.
Yeah, probably. But the point being is that it's Russia is not aligned, I don't think, to like a specific group of like right-wing people that are sympathetic to Russia.
No,
it's
not
not like it's not like when Dugin was throwing money around places in the 2010s. You know what I mean? It wasn't like that. It wasn't like Dugin having friends in the West and he would give them money or whatever. I don't think the Kremlin's sitting down and like, how are we going to like,
today's agenda, destroy America with fringe radicals.
Yeah, how are we going to fund like, Anime Graper 1488? It's like, that's not going to, it's like, how are we going to find like Asuka RP Graper 1488? No, it's not going to happen. Like, it's, yeah.
I mean, what was it? What didn't like some French dude fund Nick Fuentes with nearly $500,000 in crypto coins?
It was something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even Russia, right? Like,
no.
I mean,
by the way, I was referring to Fuentes because he's been distancing him. He's saying he's like more apathetic to the war. And like before, I remember like last year he was like hardcore Z-er posting, like he had like the Z in the bottom of his thing. That was funny though.
Yeah, I find him entertaining. He's hilarious. Now, I don't watch him. I don't watch his streams. Whatever I hear about him is other accounts on Telegram that bring him up. Like,
well, he's been exploding in the like mainstream libtard news because of his souring on Trump, and he feels betrayed, and so they've been like making a lot of like leftards have been like making a lot of hay out of it. Right. But he alleges that he didn't have any connection. Tim Pool and Dave Rubin said that they didn't know where the money was coming.
Honestly, Fuentes is a master troll. He's hilarious. When he's funny, he's unbelievably funny. I'm just going to say it how it is. I don't know if people like him or hate him. I don't care. I'm just saying how it is. He's very good at just being ironic. If people want to take that seriously, like, go ahead. There's times where he sounds like a Nazi, but then he's also friends with, what's her name, the Jewish woman that got the nose job. I forget her name.
Laura Loomer.
Oh,
they're not friends anymore, though. That's
okay, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, he complains about blacks and IQ, but he's friends with Kanye West. Yeah, so like whatever. I mean, I don't like, if you want to take that seriously, go ahead. Like, I get it. There's a lot of people he influences, and he thinks he has like a lot of influence on determining even local elections.
Yeah.
But I don't know. His positions aren't fixed, and neither are those of his followers.
No.
Like, their positions are determined on how angry they can make their enemies.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, they're not like other personalities in the far right who have been canceled or who have had their platforms taken away, who are like more sympathetic to Russia, like Stryker or whoever. Like you know what I mean? Like there are people that allege that TRS was like taking Russian money and shit. I know Greg Johnson like said that they were trying to like take Russian money or whatever. But I can't speculate on who takes what money. But I'm just saying that foreign lobbying is a reality. But to create like a moral panic over Russia as opposed to other ones is fucking like, come on, it's fucking stupid.
It's an election year.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, this is a tit for tat game. We did the same thing in the French elections for the past 3
Daily Wire is legitimately funded by Israel.
Yeah.
That's it's in their records. The only problem is that Lauren Chen didn't declare it with the FISA. Was it FIA or FISA? FARA. Yeah, that was her problem. If she would have declared, like, listen, a Russian gave me money, people like leftists would probably bring it up to say that she's a Russia shill or whatever, but it would have been nothing. It's because she didn't declare it, right? But the Daily Wire legitimately takes money from Israel. That's like incredible. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's self-evident. Like, just
it's pretty self-evident.
Also, completely unrelated to anything we just mentioned, because I brought it up earlier, we do have some updates on the strike in Syria that took place about an
Yeah,
hour ago,
yeah.
as of time of recording. So the strike took place in 3 waves. According to the Ministry of Health in Hama, there were 4 dead and 15 injured. And also there are still ongoing fires in places that Israel had struck across the country of Syria. And even Israeli media is saying this attack is quote-unquote unusual.
Mm.
Have they bombed southern Lebanon yet, or what's going on with that?
If you're talking about this most recent bout, no reports of that yet. But I mean, of course, Lebanon is also there have been strikes into Lebanon as part of the recent crisis, but as part of this wave of strikes, no.
Interesting. Well, what's been going on with Gaza? You haven't heard much of it.
It's go ahead. You'll probably have more fleshed out take than I will.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the daily bombing that still goes on. There was that corridor that the Israelis want to keep permanently, including like they want a very narrow buffer zone to control all traffic going between Gaza and Egypt. But I think maybe the most significant thing that has happened is this. There was an Israeli woman who was recently freed. This is interesting because for the first time, Hamas has come out and said that they have executed 6 prisoners. Anyways, this woman was a young woman, slightly Asiatic appearance. She appears in some of the videos.
That one. Oh, fuck. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so she was claimed to have been dead. Now, she had wounds that were healed, and as you know, the Israelis have had 1 or 2 successful campaigns where they free the prisoners, and but they will literally drop a bomb and incinerate like 100 people in order to do this. Because Netanyahu basically doesn't want a deal, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about this young woman, and I have to, Constantine, if you could help me out. I'm just hang on.
The yellow bikini one.
I don't know, but I don't know what bikini she wore, but
No, the one that got freed. That she had like this dance party where she's in a yellow bikini. See that one?
I don't know if she was.
Yeah, that's the one that looked like she was Asian.
Yeah, maybe it is the one. Maybe it is the same one. Anyways, so she was. I just forget her name. So she was freed, and people were saying that there was a story that began circulating in Israeli media that she was raped and all kinds of other things, and then she broke her silence. Basically, she said, "I was never raped. They never mistreated me, and in fact, I was wounded, from Israeli strikes, and when I was taken hostage, and I was taken to a hospital, and they performed surgery, and I'm better now." So I thought that was kind of an interesting story, but also Hamas, for the first time, admitting like we've started a new campaign. If any more hostilities, then we're going to start killing off the hostages.
Yes, they announced the 6 executions this past week.
Yep. Like the executions happened earlier, but they admitted that they were executed this week. Right.
Mm.
So the other thing that's happened is about a little over a week ago on the northern border, 3 Israeli police were killed by a Hezbollah strike. One of them was the daughter of a well-known Israeli Zionist in the military. Another 3 were killed yesterday on the Jordanian border. This has caused like a huge kerfuffle, but basically it's kind of like the same thing that is going on. I just think the most salient news is, this woman contradicting the Israeli media narrative, and Hamas now admitting that they're executing prisoners. But I think, it's basically it's a position that, it's been 10 months or 11 months, somewhere around there.
Yeah. 11.
And 11 months that they've avoided doing that, and now they have. I think it's something that they didn't want to do, and so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And on top of that, with the actual military progress in Gaza, it is completely stalled out, and I know we've referenced the casualty numbers a number of times at this point, but it is at a point where I can't think of a better way to put it than, for example, the rubble is speaking Arabic, if you will, is what the Israelis would tell you on the ground there, where they can level these buildings, they can bomb the rubble, but because of the tunnel networks, which we had discussed previously, they have not been able to root out the actual military elements of Hamas that are still conducting hit and run attacks on the Israeli forces.
Yes, that's
in the
what I wanted
Gaza
to say.
strips. Because these Israeli troops, and look, I don't blame them, I wouldn't want to in their position, but nobody wants to be responsible for the operation of sending them into the tunnels for clearing operations.
Oh, like Vietnamese tunnel
like
rats?
Vietnam, yes.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, would you want to go in there and do that?
No.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I'm also not part of the IDF, so that's that's another thing entirely.
No, but that's what I mean. Like so it's basically it's a fruitless endeavor that's basically just killing off the civilian population, more or less. You know what I mean? If you're not rooting out the but I don't know. I mean,
and that's on top of the recent failed West Bank operation that they called quits after 45 hours, not even a full 2 days.
But was killing Hamas operatives really the main goal when you really think about it? Or was it just like pure, like, it seems that the Israelis don't know what I mean, okay, I think they do know what they want.
Yeah, but they have to conceal what they want.
Yeah.
Because it's not politically feasible. I mean, Smotrich basically said it last month. We should genocide the Gazans, but the world will not let us.
Yeah.
And also, one of the Israeli rapists who sodomized a man.
To interrogate him, quote unquote. Yeah.
Yeah. So a prominent rabbi today absolved him.
Oh.
You did it to the enemy. Where's the problem?
Did they have to beat against a curb for that one?
What's that?
How many chickens did they had to beat against the curb?
We got tons of chickens.
That's kind of like before we recorded, we were talking about the booty warrior of Odessa. That's.
Oh no, I completely forgot.
The booty warrior of Odessa, yeah. Did you see the picture on that guy too? Like it's.
Ugh.
I wouldn't want to meet him in Ukrainian woods.
I wouldn't want to meet him at all, but that's just me.
Yeah, so the girl's name is Noah Argamani.
Yeah, she was at that dance party in the yellow bikini.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is there was an older woman that was rescued. This is the one where they dropped a bomb that killed, they say, up to 100 people.
Holy shit.
Yes.
For one person, yeah.
She's actually lucky to be alive because the bomb was in relative proximity. The Israelis dressed themselves as aid workers, basically, NGOs.
Yeah.
Anyways, so they asked this woman, what about their tunnels? And she said, the tunnels are a complete maze. Half the time I was blindfolded. She said, I can't even tell you where they are or how deep they go, but it's a maze. It's vast. So I thought that was very, very interesting.
They say some of these tunnels have been there for decades.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Since at least when the Lebanese kicked Israel out. Yeah. I could imagine they are labyrinthine, and so that's what I mean. Like, what could they even do? Some of them are narrow. It's like Vietnam. It's like you have to send tunnel rats in there, and it's not going to happen. I mean, there was that one documentary on the tunnel rat in Vietnam where he was like describing what it was like. Oh my God, it was terrible. I think it was called First Kill. It was that famous journalist. He wrote that book, the famous book on Vietnam. What was it called? Dispatches. Do you know that book, Dispatches?
I'm not. I've heard of the title. I'm not familiar with the book, however.
He did this documentary on where he interviewed a lot of Vietnam veterans, and one of them was a tunnel rat, and he was describing like how he would like fucking chop people's heads off with a machete, and like it was.
Oh my God.
It was brutal. Yeah. But so weeding out Hamas is obviously not the objective. But do you think it would kind of be like in 2006 or in 2002 even, where like I guess the Israelis realize they can't go any further, so they sort of just get bored and they just leave, and they leave these Gazans in the ruins? Like, what is the end goal?
Not so long as Netanyahu remains in power. I just don't see it. They would have to remove him one way or another, legally or illegally, before that would even happen, because he's dedicated, and he's even willing to escalate this into a regional war. And like I said, I don't see any way that Netanyahu, especially with Smotrich and Ben Gvir in his ear, are going to budge on that at all. And
without American intervention, probably.
Yeah, of course not. And if Trump wins, I know that they've had their spats before, but we know what side he'll come down on, especially with if Kushner's still in his ear to the degree that he was in the last administration. I don't know, Kamala might decide to put some pressure on Netanyahu to leave, but it's ultimately going to be impotent. And of course they're going to support Israel regardless. They'll finger wag, they'll issue their condemnations while not actually doing anything of any actual significance.
Well, the DNC declared her support for Israel.
Oh, yes, of course.
Oh, yeah.
But then there's the question of what, if anything, are the Iranians going to do at this point? Because the longer they put it off, assuming they're going to do something, the worse it's going to be, the more thorough, comprehensive a strike it's going to be. Now, the speculation right now is that they're still trying to gather the armaments to actually conduct the kind of attack that they want to, that they're still in negotiation with the Russians in order to get at least the air defenses in place for the inevitable Israeli counterattack towards that. So that's been one of the speculations about why the attack has been so held up, because the Iranian air defenses simply are not ready to cope with what might be an Israeli, if not outright American, response to that. So, like I said, it's a big game of wait and see. Unless Netanyahu gets removed from power, then there'll be some sort of at least attempt to walk things back. And would that succeed, I would really need to see the situation who replaces him before I would even be able to hazard a guess at that.
I'm going to offer a counter argument.
Please do.
Every time someone like Anglo-Saxon God is figuring out what's really going on behind the scenes, Russia to throw his people off will send S-400 systems and Su-34s to Iran. Really, they have no choice.
Yeah.
Because guys like him can bring down an entire government.
Oh, naturally.
Oh, you mean Putler?
Yeah. Well, Putler, like all of them.
Yeah.
No problem.
Well, no, but that's interesting because when it comes to escalation in Ukraine, I remember McCoy said that there was sort of like not an explicit, but like an implicit deal where the Russians were going to give missiles to the Houthis, but then the Americans and I believe the Syrians stepped in, and they're like, yeah, just don't do it. And Putin listened to them. He's like, yeah, I guess it's, wrong-headed. That is, I mean, that is a concern, I think, for Israel, which again heightens their skepticism of Russia, because very easily, I mean, with Iran's coordination, of course, I mean, you could imagine the enemies of Israel having long-range missiles, and it's a very tight. I mean, it's a very tricky geopolitical thing.
There's no question that the Russians are arming Iran.
Yeah,
like that's not a joke.
Missile defense systems, especially.
Yeah, and that's a very big deal, and it's part of the reason why the Israelis, and it's determining Netanyahu's policy for this war. Obviously, he wants the Americans very involved. He wants them there to take care of, like Iran when it did that strike. Of course, they said, we're not going to kill anybody. We're going to launch these missiles. And of course, the whole point was, let's see what Israel has to do to get rid of these missiles. Well, about 50% of those missiles that were launched and several hundred drones, they needed the French, the Jordanian, the Saudi, the American, and British Air Forces. So we know what it would take to tie them up in the future. That lesson has not been lost. So I think that's something that people have to factor in. The other is, when they say Russia has no red lines, it's like Russia is nearly destroyed Ukraine's entire energy system.
Yeah.
That's not a retaliation, or Poltava's not a retaliation. Remember that the day before Poltava, the Russians took out a stadium in Kharkov. And again, one of the reasons for it was there was a woman that was complaining. She went to the stadium because the stadium was used by the public for certain events. And Azov said, screw you, get out of here. This is ours now. So she posted it on Telegram. And then that was it for at least some of the members of Azov.
Shit.
Yeah, that happened the day before, right? So, they will retaliate. They will retaliate in their own way, and they understand it's a larger geopolitical war. So they're going to pass off technology to Iran. Iran is going to pass off that technology to the Houthis. The Houthis situation isn't solved, right? The Gulf of Aden and the last time, there were a few weeks ago, there was a Greek ship that was still burning for 1 week. Another ship that just blew up over 100 barrels of oil. Over 100 million barrels of oil, literally sank. They boarded this thing, they planted the bombs, that's a pressure point, right? And
you don't hear about it in the Western media that much anymore.
Right. And you don't see a lot of, the Israelis took over an island in the Red Sea across Yemen, but I don't hear a lot of activity. Doesn't mean they're not doing it, but I don't hear a lot of them, effectively countering them. The Americans are still unwilling to send in Marines there and do something about the Houthis. They don't have a plan for that. And
we still haven't figured out why America doesn't have free health care.
Maglab. Oh my God. No, but that's what I mean. It's just the election I think it's because the election has been eating up so much time and attention in the American media sphere, which is really the world media sphere. And so, I mean, what's the latest? This trans shooter, Haitians eating cats. What else has been going on in the news? The Tenna Media thing, but I noticed that people are slowly, they stopped talking about that. There was a very intense thing on right-wing Twitter about it, but then sort of the memes got stale, and yeah.
Short attention spans as usual, but
what's been going on lately? There's all manners of coal.
I mean, we are over the 3-hour mark. If you guys want to get in your closing remark, I don't know how much time you guys have.
Yeah, I gotta go eat soon.
Yeah,
so yeah.
Don't we all? But I think we all covered the rounds, unless you want to relitigate World War II for the umpteenth time, which I'm willing to if you guys are.
Martyr means a mutual of mine. I mean, it was pretty. The freak out has been legendary. The White House made a statement about it.
Yeah.
All these normie shithead conservatives are they're freaking out. Well, it's because they literally
never learn anything.
Yeah.
These people are incapable of learning anything after the 2016 election and everything that preceded it, after COVID, after the 2020, the Floyd riot, these people will never, ever learn. They're idiots. I mean, ultimately, they want to believe that it can still be saved or reformed.
Yeah. No, but I wrote this thread. I wrote this thread about it. Why conservatards, they freaked out the hardest over the Martyr Maid thing. Because, okay, there's two things. One is that they need a sort of like wholesome Chungus, you know what I mean? Like they need a wholesome Chungus hero of World War II, which is Churchill, right? Because they can't go to Stalin and they can't go to FDR. They can't go to FDR because of, you know, domestic reasons in terms of like what he did to basically destroy the American right wing, and he was a communist sympathizer and so forth. But also they're always one guilt by association stone throw away from the far right, because they've been in the normally like liberal political spectrum. Conservatards are technically quote on the right, even though they're not. But so they're always they're creatures of status, they're whores of the gates of allowable opinion, and they really grovel at the feet of people on the left that hate them, because people like Max Boot and Andrew Coyne and neocons of any stripe, who are basically just libtards anyways, they don't want to be kicked out of acceptable positions of influence.
Yeah.
And so when so go ahead, GSP. That was my thread.
Absolutely. I mean, they basically, to do so means they have no career, right? Their entire career depends on giving a losing fight to the left.
The kayfabe heels,
right. And I've often said, right, like the objective process of like Western democracies, but particularly America. I put objective in quotes, right? You know, let's say the Supreme Court is supposed to be objective, neither left or right, right? So the way it works in America is the left is right. You don't have to believe it. But after 5 years, when you see conservatives adopt their positions, then you know that they were in the right.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of the right, especially post World War II in the West. That's their entire function.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's the objective process. You see, you convinced them, you know. I went out duck hunting with my son and his boyfriend and even his boyfriend's husband. You know, that's what they want.
That Haitian migrant can hunt ducks better than me. Yeah. No, they're basically to manufacture consent for any leftist social program. That's basically it. Yeah. And they love that position because it means it's safe, and because they've bought into the narrative of this like weird like post William F. Buckley fusionism, where it's like Lincoln based, Churchill based, MLK would have voted for Trump or some shit like that. It's like, you know, it's the McNaughton painting of MLK with a MAGA hat. That's basically, and they never question beyond that. And so to any like disruption of the narrative of World War II, and listen, I know a lot of people don't like Martyr Maid because he's got the, you know, a lot of like Gen X hangups about, you know, certain politics, but you know, I like him. I don't agree with everything he says. He's very sensitive around a lot of like racial issues, for instance, but he went as far as he could. If he went any farther, it would have been over. You know what I mean? Like he would have been like, he would have gotten the Fuentes, Stefan Molyneux, TRS treatment. You know what I mean? So I think that it certainly is a turning point, because this stuff wouldn't have happened 10 years ago in conservative media. It just wouldn't have. He would have been done for. He would have been relegated to like, he would have been slotted with like, I don't know, David Irving or David Duke. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like Norman Podhoretz would have made, you know what I mean? Like it would have.
Yes.
He would have been done for. Yeah, and so the fact that people are willing to question a lot of the foundational narratives of what the current iteration of Western society and civilization is obviously a step in a positive direction. But that being said, I think that there is criticism, there's warranted criticism people have made to say that, like, well, there's a lot of issues that, you know, you can relitigate Churchill and the role of America in World War II, but there's crisis with immigration and so forth. And I understand those criticisms, but yeah, anyways.
No, I think all your examples are bang on. Like when you mentioned what could have happened, which Davids they could have become. Right?
yeah, exactly. Davids or Mikes. Yeah. No, but that's what I mean. Like, but the thing is, the reaction has been so hysterical, and I noticed that, like, like leftards, like they have been doing the usual, like, Martyr Maid's a Russia shill, Martyr Maid's a fascist, but they're always going to do that. They did this before, right?
Yeah, of
Martyr
course.
Maid's like a Russia shill because he was friends with whatever, right? But they're always going to do that. The reaction that was so hysterical and so shrieking was from conservatards desperate to defend Winston Churchill and in World War II and all that bullshit. Those were the ones that wanted him and Tucker Carlson's heads. Whereas the left, they already hate them anyways. So, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, they will. I mean, they're, you know, AA always says this. It's boomer truth. They will never, ever let go of it. They're incapable. You will never convert them. They just have to die off. That's all it is.
I hate to say it. Yeah, it's the truth. No, because their audience would have to die off. That's the problem.
Yeah.
But as for what he said, like, it was a decent interview. Like, I know Daryl was doing like the greatest hits because it's a big platform, so he didn't have to, like, he didn't go that much into depth. But like, it was only 5 minutes of the podcast, of a 2-hour podcast, and it provoked this like hysterical freak out, and it was something else. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to learn. This isn't my original take, but I am glad to learn that blasphemy is still socially unacceptable when you go after the right quote unquote gods.
Yeah. Has there been any other news?
Not. I mean, we covered pretty much all the major stuff. Once again, things have been very Ukraine heavy because of what's been happening in the Middle East is stalled out, I should say, beyond those recent strikes we did have in Syria, and we did touch a little bit on what was happening in Asia. But like I said, a lot of it is Ukraine heavy. So after a certain point, some of it just becomes speculation or covering the same topic again and again. But that's all the major news items I had personally. I don't know if GSP had anything last minute or whether you had anything last minute for that matter.
No, that's about it for me. I think, you know, we've covered just about everything. I think it was a really good discussion. I didn't have any other really big news lined up besides what's going on. I mean, we could talk about, like, you know, what Macron is doing right now, but but I think it's just a little drier, and it's not the most. I don't think the audiences are as riveted by that as the kind of the news that we covered tonight.
Yeah, I want some more concrete developments with some of the stuff coming out of the French electoral politics and the formation of their parliament and their cabinet before I start going around, because once again, you can say what happened, but until the details are actually fleshed out, there's only so much detail. There's only so much of an opinion you can give that, like, they appointed a new prime minister who's a complete bureaucrat. That's just surprise to nobody. That and yes, they did pretty much undermine both the left-wing coalition and Front National. But like I said, I need to see some more substantial things, what the cabinet actually looks like, by the time everything's said and done, before I give any conclusive opinion on it.
Did he really stab the left in the back, or is it like it's more or less?
No, he's being opportunistic. He's pretending to be like this, based right-wing guy. Like he's not.
He's a Jupiter. He's a part of the what's Big Spence's thing. He's an Apollonian. He's an Apollonian.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, the Jupiterian president who had a more weak-willed response to riots than Barack Obama. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Oh man. What else is there in the news? Well, Martin, I mean, okay, listen, you mentioned Fuentes and they hate each other. But Martin, he's been posting a lot about I even saw Vivek Ramaswamy reply to him, but Martin's been posting about this Ohio situation with the Haitian migrants that they just dumped there. And there's this video of the local city council and everything, and it's crazy. Because you have a lot of these elites, you have like these hicklibs that run these places where they're just like normal, ordinary citizens and they're saying like, oh, this is a non-issue. And they're like, well, no, these Haitians are eating my cat.
These Haitians are eating my cat. Pay attention to me.
There was this post on Reddit. I had to tweet this. I know I shouldn't have. The follower of mine posted that on Reddit. The theory is that Peter Thiel is paying old grannies in Ohio to say that Haitians are eating her cats, that this is all like a right-wing racist cover-up, that like it's an op, it's like a gay op from the right. And I said like,
I mean, how long till the next? There has to, like, as soon as it's an article in the New Yorker, okay. Yes, Haitians do eat cats, and here's why it's a good thing. Like that's all it takes to remedy this thing. I don't know why are they freaking out so much? Like that's literally all it takes.
Yeah, they say that Peter Thiel's funding grannies because he wants to install a Fourth Reich in America. This is the Reddit consensus on the Haitian migrant issue. And so I tweeted out paying off old ladies to say that Haitians ate their cat's gripper to install the Fourth Reich gripper. Like
it's just so dumb.
Oh man. Oh, it's crazy. Apparently they're also like I saw something about the Clownvid cult. They're like gearing up for the election as well, saying that there's like a new high or whatever.
Yeah.
And these people never exist. They're sort of like those lost soldiers in Saipan that were still there in the 1960s. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's really sad. But it is what it is.
Yeah, that's.
Oh my God! Someone on Twitter tweeted. It's like a viral tweet. Guess what happens after they eat all of the cats? Oh God! That was like that video of cannibalism when they had the Haitian Civil War. Yeah. It was like a year ago. Remember? Oh my God! Guess what?
It's too much.
That's too much, man. That's like comical levels of racism. Oh, I think that it's this big account called Kittler. It's
Kittler?
Like
oh my! Are you kidding me?
Kittler, yeah.
Kittler.
Oh my God! You know what people are saying? Like this is the base version of cat turd. Oh man. What happened to cat turd?
I think he's still just chugging along as usual, with the same old grift. But I frankly don't care enough about him to keep up with him.
Yeah, me neither. Is there any Canadian news, or no?
That'd be a question for you guys, not me. So
I want.
We're Canadian guys asking the American if this Canadian.
I mean,
no, there never is.
One of our commenters, chatters, which I take no offense, but did think I was a part of the Canadian cabal, and I did have to inform him that no, that is not the case.
Apparently, the Israeli Russians love recruiting Canadians. That's Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Lauren Southern. Lauren Chen is Canadian. Did you know that?
Yes, she
The
used to be
Hoover.
called Wandering Millennial.
Yeah, roaming millennial.
Roaming, yeah, roaming. I think she even was on a podcast once with, I could be wrong, but maybe Richard Spencer. Definitely Black Pigeon Speaks.
Yes.
She was with him. I saw her in a few of them, and she used to be kind of like a semi-regular on some of these podcasts. I'm talking like 4 or 5 years ago, at least 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine what they would want is they would want like to kind of square the circle. How can we get not just Western right wingers to be anti-Russia, pro-Israel, right? Because there's a certain segment that of right wingers in the West that they don't like China, but they kind of like Russia, but they don't like Israel, or they don't care about Israel, and they need these people invested because, frankly, like Israel lost their support from the left. They never really had it, but they went too far with them this year, and so and it's really also just a lot of Jews. Left-wing Jews in America are not very supportive of Israel right now, right? They make up the bulk of the organizers of these demonstrations, and sometimes just the bulk of the people on the ground.
Pretty much the diaspora. I would say, let's just be fair to say, under 50, they've lost the support of.
Yeah, it's over.
Yeah, they're horrified. They're embarrassed and horrified.
Yeah, no, but to be fair, like a lot of pro-Ukrainian people on the right wing also hate Israel, but that's
They do, but I mean, a situation will always arise where you have, let's say, 3, 4, 5 sacred cows, non-negotiable, you say, and a situation will arise where you'll be allowed to only choose one,
right?
And it's at that moment where ultimately right wingers will choose Israel.
Yeah.
Right, because at the end of the day, they might complain about this or that or Jewish power and so on, but ultimately they're going, okay, so Yermak is Jewish, or Shmoigel is Jewish, Zelensky is Jewish, Resnick was Jewish. Okay, so what? Like a situation will always arise where ultimately they will show you like what the number one non-negotiable value is. The one thing they won't compromise on. And
certainly like the mainstream conservatives, that's true.
Yeah, and it also goes for people who support Israel. Like, I don't really care about the war in Ukraine too much, but I'm a really big supporter of Israel. Well, if it looks like Russia is like helping Iran and supporting Assad, and Hamas regularly goes to Russia and is supporting Islamic Jihad for a few years, well, then they're not going to be, because ultimately, no matter how base they are, the non-negotiable value is the existence of Israel.
Yeah. No, but that's what I mean. Like, it's like what I think it was Night Owls last night or yesterday that there was something the Nightmare Vision said about Barry Weiss, where he's like, to the outside world, Barry Weiss looks like this like weird centrist, like the left me, but in actuality, she's like a cutthroat ethno-imperialist.
That's all she is.
Yeah. Like
her non-negotiable value is the existence of Israel, and
everything else flows from it.
Everything that is good for Jewish people. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Everything else is a distant second or worse.
So that's why she's sort of like pivoting to the left me. Like even we call it the Barry Weiss centrist containment zone, where it's like, you know what I mean, like journalists like Glenn Greenwald or Matt Taibbi or whatever, like they know of frog discourse, but they'll never land to frog discourse, but yet they'll create like enough of a stink about the orthodox left-wing position, but in actuality their centrism only extends to their own issues.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think so 2023 and 2024 were extraordinary years, right?
Yes.
Whereas before they could always count on left-wing Jews in America to support the candidate. What Israel did and is doing is so shocking that they can't.
Yeah.
Right? And Netanyahu brought it upon them. So I mean, it's his own fault. It's like I don't have any pity, so I don't care.
Yeah.
But that is what has happened, right? You have people that are looking of Jewish descent who are looking further down the road and saying, this will pass, but our name is mud, because what he did is reflecting on all of us. It's just, that's how horrendous it is. Even they cannot acknowledge that it can be isolated to just him or Israel, right? Yes. So, and again, that stems back to why they bring up AIPAC all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because it's like I think, like, I was trying to think about like the motivations of conservatives, and I know that there's a long history of like Zionism in America, the Gideon Bible thing, Schofield Bible, and I know that there's a long history with like their religious beliefs of various evangelical groups and the end times and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. But I think when it comes to like either non-evangelical old guard people that aren't the old guard of conservatism, people like your average like Fox News listener, I think it's because it's sort of like on the far right, the whole thing about the Austrian painter, right? It's sort of like, okay, what is an unallowable opinion? What is something that is unacceptable? Now, when it comes to Israel, you have like the international left, they don't like Israel. Institutions like the UN doesn't like Israel, supposedly, in their minds. And they're like, okay, this is like something that I'm not going to get canceled for, in terms of like, if I were to go and start, racism posting or JQ posting or whatever. But it's something that will get me heat and like edgy points against like what I perceive as like the libtards. And so I think like,
yes,
the need of fake edginess is what compels a lot of like conservative Republicans into worshiping Israel, because they're like, oh, the international community is attacking them, but that means that like Israel must be like this shining hill,
because the UN is trying to take over America.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I hate the UN. Leave my America alone.
Yeah, so I think like it's definitely like a perversion of John Fonte's transnational progressivism, as I covered in my podcast episode on this. It's definitely like a perversion of it, because there's like the European international institutions are going to invade America one day, and they're like putting, they're shackling Israel from doing what must be done in the Middle East.
Israel is the floodgate that holds back radical Islam from the West.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, yeah, right.
Well,
it's a form of fake edginess and bloodlust for the conservatives, because the conservatard can't control their own. They can't even police Haitians from coming into America, right?
Yeah.
Because of the Democrats. So, but the Israelis, they're like, they're perfectly fine with bombing brown people on their borders. We can't do it, but they can do it. And that's not an original insight. That's actually an insight that comes from a very powerful mutual of mine, Khashoggi, that said that, like, well, basically Israel is like this weird form of power fantasy Orientalism for the conservatard. The Israelis can do it, but we can't. But as long as the Israelis can bomb brown people, but we can't on their borders, then it's fine. It's like we can become geopolitical hawks. But I've talked about this before, but it's getting late, so
yeah, I mean, good insight as always. But yeah, like I said, we're over 3.5 hours, in which case the people are going to start revolting soon. So, any last words from anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I just had an internal conversation that, like, suppose a right-wing tard meets like a liberal Jew and says, you better elect Trump. because without Trump, there won't be any Israel. And then the left-wing Jew says, fine by me.
Oh, man. That was a great tweet by Kittler. What do you think is going to happen when they run out of gas?
That's hilarious.
That's so... Oh, my God. Oh, man. That's funny. Oh, is there any election? Fuck election news. Let's get out of here.
I mean, I can
too much coal for one day.
I can read off the betting odds for like the 17th time, but I doubt anyone wants to hear those. You can look those up on your own. But yeah,
they say Kamala's gonna win.
The last I saw from it was like deadlocked 50-50.
Holy shit!
So
I said that it was going to be a pretty
Obama,
tight election.
Michelle Obama's going to come in last minute and win. That's my prediction.
She's gonna drop a shoulder, Randy Savage style, from the top rope. Yeah. She's gonna save America, Big Mike. Yeah. That's funny.
It's gonna happen. You've heard it here first. It's an official war report prediction. But once again, Gio, thank you very much for coming on. It's always a very fun time.
Man,
Always a very interesting time to do these kind of episodes. And like I said, it's been far too long since our last one. If you have any closing thoughts or anything you want to shill, now is the time. I'll just say preemptively, give this man your money.
No, yesterday I released another Content Minded. It's a whole episode on the art and ideas around Paul Cezanne. So, yeah, go and check it out. Yeah.
Check it out and give
worth a listen. Worth a listen.
Great listen. Oh man.
GSP, any closing thoughts?
No, that's it. That's it for now. What another wonderful time. But no, I don't have any other news or internal dialogue.
Oh, perfect. And I've said my piece as it is. So we will see everyone next time. And goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.
God bless and good.